Well, good afternoon and welcome to the meeting of the Board of Directors of the East Bay Regional Park District for September 4th. Our first item of business is the Pledge of Allegiance. Member Lane, will you lead us?
All right, please stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We'll now move to the approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion by Member Wieskamp, a second by Member Dotson. All in favor, say aye. Aye. The motion passes unanimously. All right, our next item is public comments. Member Clerk, Madam Clerk, do we have comments?
Yes, President Watsby, we have two speakers. The first speaker is Mr. David Nebenfuhr. Yeah.
Welcome.
I've been staying at the campgrounds. My house is being remodeled, but I have almost exceeded the 30-day limit. I wonder if I could have an exception for that.
Which campground are you staying at, sir?
Anthony Chabot. I have 3 dogs, so I've found the serenity up there is remarkable. So my motel stay is limited.
Well,
I know during the week.
as much as I love the serenity of that campground, also I'll refer to Jim O'Connor, our AGM in charge of operations and the campgrounds.
Or Steve is there.
Pardon me, Steve Castile.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Steve Castile, Chief of Park Operations. Typically, within our campground reservations, we have a maximum limit of about 15 days where somebody can stay into one location or any locations within the 1-year process on the campground areas. You can talk outside. Yeah, so we can talk outside with that one.
Okay, just a point of clarification, is that 15 days at Anthony Chabot, 15 days at Del Val? And
No, that's 15 days district-wide.
total district-wide. Okay, well, thank you for your comments, sir. I hope we can work something out.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Jonathan Goodwin.
Good afternoon. On Friday afternoon, I got the notes, or I got information about the agenda for this meeting. Saw that there was in the consent calendar a motion to add 50% to the money going to ESA for the project at McCoskers, the creek restoration, which amounts to a 65% increase of, which brings the whole thing up to $1.2 million. This is a very large amount of money. I wanted to have time to look at the actual information to see what was being bought, what was being paid for, what the scope of work was. I was particularly concerned because the EIR that they had done lacked large areas of specificity in terms of what work they were doing environmentally, and I want to make sure that that was covered in what you guys are going to vote on, because otherwise you're going to come back and have to pay even more money, and that, 65% overrun is rather extreme, I think, for most people. Just to give you an example, it's not stated in the EIR that there was any wetlands delineation done. It doesn't say that any of the areas were said to be wetlands. And the areas where you want to dump all that dirt from the creek for free because it's your own property, those have wetland indicator species on them. This isn't accounted for. Not only that, there's a big concern that this plan does not account for the fact that the money is about 1/3 to 1/2 raised. And if it doesn't get raised, that means that the creek restoration is not going to happen or not happen completely, which means you're going to continue to have hazardous conditions because of the sinkholes, which means that if you open it up, you're exposing, you know, I want to make sure that this stuff is actually being accounted for. The board should want to make sure that these things are actually being accounted for, and that can't be done with the materials provided. So we requested on Friday, a day before a holiday, that we get these information, and then on Monday was a holiday. Nobody was home. So we still have not gotten these 2 contracts nor the original bid. We're asking that you postpone this item for, you know, till your next meeting, which isn't a huge amount of time. It's not going to delay things dramatically, just to give us time to read this information and look it over, and to give interested board members an opportunity to see if this is complete and what is going on. And that ends my comments. I ask you to take action on that. Thank you.
President Waspy, would you like staff to respond to the timing issue?
Yeah, I guess I would be interested. Why don't we take it off the consent calendar and then have a full staff presentation?
Great, great.
Okay, that sounds good also. Okay. Any other public comments?
No, President Waspy.
Okay, then we'll move right to the consent calendar, which contains 9 items. Thank you. Clerk, do we have anybody any questions or comments?
Not on the consent from the board members. I have no one, but we do have 2 speakers. Did you?
Okay.
I have item D
Okay.
and item G.
Indeed, these are questions.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, if they're just questions, let's go to those first. Item D is the authorization to grant storm drain and slope protection easements to the city of Berkeley and Tilden Park. Member Rosario.
Yeah, I just wanted to know, I'm sure there's going to be BMPs in place when we're allowed to build that outlet there. My concern is, what happens if there's some damage below where their outlet comes out? Who's responsible for that?
Bob Nesbitt, Assistant General Manager, Acquisition Stewardship and Development. As Suzanne is coming up, I just make the announcement that Michael Reeves' urgency had to be out today. So Suzanne knows enough, I think, and she'll come up and try to answer your question, Director Rosario.
Suzanne Lusk, Senior Land Acquisition Agent. The easement is the complete responsibility of the city of Berkeley. So if anything should happen additional, they would be responsible.
Any damage below below that mitigation area?
Yes.
Okay, great. I don't want to see us in another Kennedy Grove.
All right, then we'll move to item G, the authorization to file an application for grant funds under the Habitat Conservation Fund, California Wildlife Protection Act of 1990 for Sibley Volcanic Regional Preserve.
My question here was for, how much of that is strictly for the stream restoration project? Or is it,
Need another pen.
Thank you. Grants Manager Tiffany Margalisi. This application to the Habitat Conservation Fund would be in the trails category, and it is for nature trails that connect urban populations to nature.
Any other questions, comments on that?
No, we don't have any questions, but I just received an email. The streaming is not, they're not able to hear you upstairs, so you need to move your microphone a little bit closer. Modern technology. Is it on? Director Waspy?
Yes,
President
mine is on.
Okay,
It hasn't been. I apologize.
that's okay.
President Waspy, I'll make a motion to move the consent calendar
We
with
do-
the exception of item C.
Okay. Yeah, because we have speakers.
With the exception of item C, move approval with the exception of item C, which will be removed from the consent calendar.
Okay, we have a motion by Member Corbett, a second by Member Lane. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, hearing none. Okay, that is what we will do. So, by your motion, we just approved the consent calendar with the exception of item C. So we'll move to item C, which, for the folks that don't understand or haven't seen the agenda, it's the authorization to amend a contract for services with Environmental Science Associates for the Restore McCosker Creek Project, Robert Sibley Volcanic Regional Preserve.
Mr. President, members of the board, Bob Nisbet, Assistant General Manager, Acquisition, Stewardship, and Development. I'll go ahead and start this item, but I also have Brian Holt here and Julie Bondurant who can fill in any more detailed questions we have that respond to some of the speakers' comments. Also here we have a representative from ESA, so if there's any specific questions about ESA, Scott is here as well. So just a couple notes related to the comments from the speaker. This contract with ESA does go back quite a ways. I would not characterize it as a cost overrun. This project has been done in such a way that when we started, it was essentially kind of a feasibility study. What can be done there? We didn't have any grants at that point. We didn't have the money that we're getting from Caltrans, the various sources that are summarized in the board material for you. So as that work started to progress, so did the scope and so forth. So we're at a point now where, again, it's not an overrun of previous work they've done. It's that the scope of this complete project as the land use plan was developed, went through the public hearing process, et cetera, EIR came out, kind of expanded and gave us the opportunity to request more work from ESA. That work is summarized very well on page 18 of the board material. There are 3 bullet points at the bottom of the page. I think that very succinctly characterize this extra work. They will be assisting us with response to comments on the EIR. I believe we received more than 124 comments on the EIR. They will also be taking the design plans to full construction drawings. This was not anticipated in the initial scope of work, assisting in bidding, assisting with permits, so forth and so on. So this contract is necessary for us to continue this first scope of work. The speaker did accurately state that full implementation, full build-out of the land use plan is not fully funded. That is stated in your board material. I think the full build-out is stated as like $9 to $10 million. We are going to continue to go out and get grants, as the one that Tiffany just answered on today. And we will, of course, phase the project as appropriate over time to get all the work done as the funds become available. But the focus for the first phase is the money we've already received, which is really focused on creek restoration, one of the hallmarks of this land use plan and this project. So I just wanted to set the table with that, but Brian and Julie and a representative from ESA are here if the board would like a more elaborate presentation of the status.
Would members of the board like to question or comment before we go to public comments?
Well, I'd like to have more information.
Okay.
Members of the board, Julie Bondurant, Principal Planner.
And I think for the benefit of the staff and the public, if the board had specific questions we can focus on that Julie can answer. She's not sure exactly what part you want to do. I will just mention, because it is very common, we do not have 100% funding when we complete environmental documentation and planning documents on the majority of our projects. So it is not uncommon. This is probably the most ambitious urban creek restoration we've ever attempted, and so we've had an extensive amount of engineering and biological review on that, so that's part of the increased costs. But this is a very large restoration project. There are recreational amenities such as the camping and the trail use and those things, but the main source of project work will be the correction of all that filling of that canyon, and I think that's something we're excited, proud, and cautiously optimistic that we will get even more grants. We are running into grant deadlines to complete the environmental documentation, so that's important too to keep in mind as far as the timing. Julie?
Yes, so specific questions, and I'll try to direct my responses.
Member Corbett.
I guess one question that has been raised, that we have heard that this is not a cost overrun, but I think a little more information as to why there is additional cost, an explanation of that I think would be very helpful. And then I think the GM actually already hit on this, but, you know, our information does say that the projected cost estimate does not have complete funding yet. A little more about how we believe we are confident that we will get to the funding level.
And if that's okay with you, I'll go ahead. And one of the things that's fairly new, last 10 years new, it's not new, but last 10 years, is the grant agencies are requiring all environmental work to be done as part of many of the even applications. Some just say you have to have it done by a deadline, which is $500,000 worth of grant in this project. You have a deadline to complete that. But for some applications, and Tiffany, if you need to, can respond to more, you have to have it done before you even apply. So getting the environmental work that we should do anyway done promptly allows us to be more competitive to fund more of the project.
Yes, that's correct. Several of the grant applications are specifically requiring CEQA and have timelines, not as strict as the one that was discussed, but all of them have those requirements. As for the expanded scope, when ESA was initially contracted, they were not to be involved in the CEQA analysis. At that point, we thought that it might be an initial study, which could be done completely in-house, except for some traffic and noise and air quality, which is being handled by a different consultant. But as the project progressed, we decided that it would be prudent to do a full EIR on that, and that required more technical studies. And at that point, we brought ESA on to help with a lot of those technical studies, which are included in the EIR. Additionally, ESA has been very helpful in helping us secure the grant funds, where a lot of technical information was required. And then as we move into permitting and to help inform the EIR, we have progressed substantially in the construction documents for the project, and a lot of detail is required, up to 65% for us to complete the permit applications and submit those in a timely fashion. And so that added to the scope of work from what was initially contracted with the ESA. Also, because ESA has become involved in the development of the EIR, they're also going to be assisting with the response to comments. And we have received over 142 comments. Several of those are multiple pages, and all of the comments must be given due consideration under CEQA. Does that help lay out?
Yeah, so in other words, the scope of work has increased based on our requirements in addressing the CEQA information that we need to provide, and to give us information so we can be responsive to questions that are raised.
That's true. And also, the scope of area of the creek restoration is also expanded. When ESA was initially contracted, it was for about 1,600 linear feet of creek, and now it's up to about 2,900 linear feet. And that's because as we went through the technical analysis on geotechnical, hydrological, and really looked at the state of the deteriorating culverts, it was determined that it would be very prudent to also look at another culverted tributary that is located under the fill in what would be the recreation area, and to include that as part of the restoration. So we've considerably increase the area that's being considered for the restoration of the creek portion of the contract.
So the initial information that we received informed us that it was a much larger project that wouldn't have been known without that initial information. So we're doing what we should do to be prudent and expand the scope so that we can address those concerns that were raised because of the geological and other issues you discovered with regard to the culvert, et cetera.
That's correct.
And Director Corbett, just in context, is just the scope here is greater than we thought as a good idea. Actually, it's a better idea because we're doing more Urban Creek restoration. But I think it's important in the context to remember this entire area was an industrial quarry site with a haul road with fill on top of the creek for major trucks operating a quarry out of that site. The McCosker family operated highway projects and tunnel projects and things like that. So this is a natural area that's not natural any longer because it was filled, but there's habitat there grown on that fill that we still have to mitigate for and look at. And I think very specifically comments made as to any wetlands that were even created by the construction where you do a detention basin, those things, those all have to be addressed. We have to get permits from the Water Board, from Fish and Wildlife, from everyone. So all of this information is far more than, volunteer citizen information. It's required for permitting to build this project. So all the wetland issues, all the habitat issues are not just what we want to do as part of the project, but they are a requirement to get the permits to build the project. And if there's any specifics on those permits, Matt is our Chief of Stewardship, very, very clear on how many permits he has to get to do this restoration.
So based on this information, it appears to me we're just doing our due diligence to address any environmental concerns raised by the public or necessitated by the regulations and requirements that we have.
Correct.
And in many, not just here at the Park District, but a lot of construction projects, you really don't know the scope until you start digging into things, and that sounds like what happened here.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Member Rosario.
So what would the consequences be if we delayed a decision today to the next board meeting? What timelines would be
We are already pushing the envelope on, I believe, 2 extensions of one of the grants, and I believe that deadline is October to complete the environmental documentation. So we put at risk one of the grant sources because we're already pushing our envelope out.
And just for clarification, ESA needs this amendment in order to help me with the responses to comments on the EIR.
Thank you. Member Coffey.
So, excuse me, this firm's work is going into completion of the EIR, and what is the remaining public process with ultimately presenting the EIR to the board for approval?
The EIR will come to the board as a public hearing, and you will receive responses to comment on every comment that was made as part of that document that will come to the board along with the EIR and the land use plan.
And CEQA requirements are such that all that documentation will be available to the public in advance of the meeting?
Yes.
Member Corbett.
Does that include all the documentation that was asked for within the question during public comments?
Yes, the response to comments address any questions related to, as was brought up, wetland delineations. They would cover how we went about that analysis and any mitigations that are being provided.
So people can ask to review the scope of work, the additional contract and all that we were just talking about today. That underlying information could be available if someone wants to take a look at it.
That would be a separate request. That would be a public information's request. That request is not related specifically to the EIR and is coming after the close of the EIR comment period.
But it could
In terms of the contracts that they've requested, those would be public records. I'm not sure that the amendment has been executed yet, so once it's executed, we will gladly provide that to you. And the prior agreement that we had with ESA is also a public record, and that should be easy to provide to you.
Thank you very much.
Any further questions or comments by board members? Hearing none, we have 2 public comments, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, President Wasby. We have Mr. Jonathan Goodwin and Mr. Eric Olafson.
Jonathan Goodwin from Canyon, you might remember me from a few minutes ago. So I want to tip my hat to Director Corbett. I thought she handled that very nicely. But what I want to bring up is whether in the long run the board is being well served by this whole process. I want to commend the general manager for finally getting religion about getting these studies done. This was not done for the checklist amendment business for this project. When you put in the loop trail, you built a parking lot on an area that's a wetland. Whether it's a delineated wetland, I can't say, but you can't either because you didn't do the work. There are, right across the fence is an arbitrary line there with a barbed wire fence, and there's horsetails, and there's reeds that grow in wet areas. It's against legal convention to build a parking lot on a wetland without doing any work. In parallel, these studies that have been listed should have been done a long time ago. For example, a consultation with the Corps may actually negate a lot of the work that's been done. In other words, the Corps is going to look at the plan and say, yes, yes, this, no. And then you're going to have to redesign it all over again, or some portion thereof. The business about the consultation with, which wasn't mentioned, Fish and Wildlife, that may have the same thing. In the EIR, there is no wetland delineation. What is with that? There is no biological assessment of the area. That should have been done on day one. A simple biological assessment. What are we dealing with? Are we going to be crushing, estivating protected species? In other words, California red-legged frog while we do this project? Who knows? It's not documented. It's not been looked into. I want to get to this point. I think the district is very likely, without knowing any of the details, well served on the engineering part of this because you've got 2 engineers with their names on this item, Messrs. Grau and Nisbet. And I'm sure that when it comes to engineering, they're paying attention because that's their interest, that's their business. There is no environmental environmental planner working for the district on this project. There is no environmental manager involved with their name on any document. Any document. An environmental manager has a background in the environmental studies, right, biology, blah, 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 and in planning. I keep saying manager, I mean environmental planner, so that they know what the planning procedure is. I don't think the board has been well served in this process. About the parking lot, from the parking lot on top of the wetland, or very likely, very possibly wetland, it was never investigated. Up until this particular motion, the board is not being served because you're not getting the input of somebody who understands both the environmental and the planning process. You should hire a consultant to look over this contract to see if you're really getting what you're supposed to get, not from the engineering part. I mean, I trust them. I think, Nisbet's not a bad guy, all things considered. But in terms of the environmental part, who knows? It's not reflected. There's not incompetence in this reflected in the EIR. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Olafson.
Hello, my name is Eric Olafson. I'm a resident of Canyon. I'm adjacent to the Sibley, Huckleberry, McCosker sites. I have a couple of items that I'd like to discuss. One is in the consent item on your calendar, it states that findings from 2 feasibility reports, the 2014 camping program update, It says that, that this is considering a group campsite for the McCosker site. It's a little bit, it kind of misrepresents what's in the 2014 camp update. It's in the camp update, this is a quote, and quote, given the site's McCosker limitations coupled with its remote setting, it could be developed into a relatively small 10 to 15 unit convenience campground for families. However, the site is relatively close to the family campground at Anthony Chabot Regional Park and would not advance the district's goals for equitable distribution of opportunities. It kind of states that there really shouldn't be any camping at this site, and that's 2014, that's not that long ago. My second point is that just because you have a funding, a grant funding problem does not mean you should shortcut environmental. I'm a former environmental planner. I could tell from the beginning that this was going to be an EIR. To any environmental planner, it would have been obvious. But you have recreational planners doing the environmental in this job, and it kind of shows. I don't know how ESA is going to possibly get a wetland delineation and a biological assessment done, considering there's California red-legged frog that has to be looked at. It has certain dates that need to be used. Eyeshine surveys, a number of things that need to be done. I don't think they can do it. Perhaps they can, but I would be very surprised if it can be done by October 2016, 2018. The other question I have is if they say, you know, there has been like half the funding for this creek restoration has been attained, and there's another 5 to 7 million that's going to be needed for the creek restoration. If that money isn't gotten, how is this project going to go forward? I would think that you need to close it down because of the pedestrian hazards from the sinkholes. So my third item is that the consent item asks for $380,840 to be added onto this contract. That seems, as a former environmental planner, that seems extremely high. The amount of money that's been spent on this is, I don't know how it's been broken down. It sounds like engineering was a lot of the, like the environmental was sort of neglected at the beginning of this project, and it really shows. This is one of the worst EIRs I've seen done. And I thought ESA did it, but now it sounds like it was in-house. East Bay Regional Park needs to have environmental planners doing their environmental work, and not recreational planners. And that's the way this has been done. The meetings that we've had have all been recreation oriented, not environmentally oriented. And I would like to get a copy of the contracts with ESA. You said they would be available. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
President Waspy, just a GM comment. I just feel compelled to, I know the board's very aware of this, but I believe we have an outstanding stewardship department full of biologists, full of experts, not in recreation planning, but in biology and endangered species. We have received awards for restoration of habitat for all of those species throughout the district, including funding to do that. And Matt Grell is here, our chief of stewardship, who has not been hiding this entire process, has been very involved from the very beginning. We care deeply about what we do for the environment. It is fundamental to our mission. And we have an outstanding group of dedicated professional biologists in our stewardship department. As far as the funding, if it takes longer, it gives us more time to get funding, but we don't want to lose funding that we've worked so hard to get. And I am confident that when we are ready to build this project, we will get the appropriate permits and the appropriate funding to do this. And that's the purpose of getting the environmental documentation and public process completed. I really respect the concerns of people to protect the environment and citizens who live next to our parks. But we are a regional system of regional parks, and we have a regional stewardship department that I'm extremely proud of. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, if there's no further comments, we have been Oh, pardon me, Member Wieskamp, I'm sorry.
Well, the concern was brought up if you had to, couldn't do all of the creek work at once. Is some logical way of phasing it so it's safe for the public? I think that's a fair question. Do we have someone who would like to answer that one? Julie?
I'll start, and then Matt or Scott Stoller with ESA can jump in. The project is scheduled now to be phased due to sensitive species in the area. Our construction window is very limited, so we're already planning it over a multi-year contract, and we usually start downstream and work upwards. That's the nature of restoration work.
We could see that in the future. I think that would be helpful to the public, how this could be phased, so that there are no questions about it. Does that seem feasible?
Yes.
Good, thank you.
Member Rosario.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I feel very comfortable with the work that our staff has done. I think the general manager did very well in highlighting the fact that this park district has done a lot of mitigation work in the past and successfully. And I don't think we're being misled here. I think Julie Bondurant and Matt Grau have done a wonderful job, and I think I think there may have been an initial mistake in the beginning when we opened the park, but I think now I think we are on track, especially with the EIR, and I think I just want to commend our staff for their good work. And I don't, my opinion of the work that we've done, I do not concur with the public comments, but I do think we are being well served, and that's it.
Thank you. Any further comments? Hearing none, we have been asked as part of the consent calendar to authorize to amend a contract for services with ESA in the amount of $380,840 for continued work on the restoration of McCosker Creek project. Do I have a motion to accept that? A motion by Member Rosario.
Second.
And a second by Member Coffey. If there's no further discussion, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, motion passes unanimously. Thank you all, staff and speakers, for your comments. We move now to the authorization to accept the dedication of fee interest in 96-plus acres of real property and a trail easement, transfer and appropriate funds for acquisition-related expenses, execute a funding agreement, accept and appropriate funding from Ponderosa Homes II Incorporated, and create a new endowment fund, Los Trompas Wilderness Regional Preserve. Welcome, Brian.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, President Waspy, members of the board. My name is Brian Holt, Chief of Planning GIS. Introducing this item today, a little bit not necessarily unique, but I'm not sure if we've had one of these land dedication projects come forward. And this is being brought forward by our planning department, and rather than our acquisition department. We work very closely with acquisition, but this is a good example of one of those projects that is a long-standing advanced planning sort of item where we engage and work with a project developer for many years, perhaps decades at times. And eventually this all comes to a head and results in some level of a dedication or a donation of property. So with that, Senior Planner Naomi Laval is going to present the item. But I just wanted to introduce that and just kind of give a little bit of a preview to a presentation that we'll give later in the meeting under staff reports on our strategic actions by governmental entities process. And this is a good example of a project that comes out of that process. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Naomi. Thank you very much.
Naomi Laval, Senior Planner, Acquisition, Stewardship, and Development. Good afternoon, President Waspy and members of the board. I'm here today to speak about the Padva property dedication. And as you can see, we have been working closely with land acquisition, Suzanne Lusk, Senior Land Acquisition Specialist, and other members of planning. The Padva property is located here, you can see on the eastern side of Las Trampas near 680. Today, the board will be, the action before the board is the authorization to accept a trail easement over a geologic hazard abatement district. Wasting and non-wasting funds for the long-term management of a conservation easement area. Wasting funds are funds that are meant to be spent entirely, in this case in the first 3 years of management. And non-wasting funds will establish a permanent fund. Following the first 3 years, the permanent fund, the interest from the fund will fund the long-term management. And we are also asking for the authorization to accept the 96-acre dedication of the Padva property, which will expand the eastern boundary of the Las Trampas Wilderness Regional Preserve, provide new trail access into the existing parkland, and serve to further protect the surrounding habitat and open space values. The Padva property, seen here to the north, is part of the Southern Las Trampas Land Use Plan Amendment. This land use plan amendment will formally incorporate 756 acres into the existing Las Trampas wilderness and open the land banked properties Chen, here, and Peters Ranch. Also included in the land use plan amendment is the existing 1.8 miles of existing trails, mainly the Calaveras Ridge Trail segment here, and one existing staging area. Additionally, there will be 3.3 miles of proposed trails that will be included in the land use plan amendment, 5 proposed public access points, and 2.2 miles of other trails here towards the south that will be part of the Freya Preserve development. These trails will be built by the developer of the Freya Preserve development and under the administration of the city of San Ramon, but will be connected into the larger Las Trampas wilderness. They are providing a main segment of the Calaveras Ridge Trail. The Padva property was a 106-acre property here in western San Ramon. In 2016, the town of Danville, western Danville. In 2016, the town of Danville approved the Red Hawk subdivision, which is 20 homes built on approximately 10 acres on the eastern portion of the larger 106-acre parcel. Part of the conditions of approval for this project includes the offer of dedication of open space lands to the Park District, a public trail easement, and other improvements on the property. A geologic hazard abatement district was put in place to provide a buffer between the open space dedication and the residential development. You can see the buffer here. The purple is the outline of the development area, and the orange is the open space parcel. And this area in between is the GAD property, the Geologic Hazard Abatement District. Trail users will access the property from the residential streets in the subdivision over a paved access road to the open space parcel. This is the trail easement that is part of the action before you today. The Park District will share curb-to-curb maintenance responsibilities with the Geologic Hazard Abatement District, but will not be responsible for any other improvements on the property, on the GAD property. The Padva property itself, apologies. So the Padva property itself has high habitat and scenic values. There are 2 ponds located on the property, an upper pond on the western edge of the property, and a lower pond more towards the center of the Padva property. There's also 3 drainages, and the property is characterized by riparian and oak woodland habitat, annual grasslands, And California red-legged frogs, Diablo range, garter snakes, red-tailed hawks are among the species that have been observed and cataloged on the property. Improvements as part of the dedication will include public on-street parking. Trail users can park anywhere within the new subdivision on the public streets, but because there's no houses here on this western side of the road, we anticipate trail users will mostly park here. There are also gates and fencing and signage as part of the property improvements that the developer will be putting in place. And they have built a approximately 0.9 mile emergency vehicle and maintenance trail, as well as a trailhead. This was built to district standards, and the Trails Development Department has been very involved in delineating the trail and providing oversight of the construction. The trail starts here in the eastern lower part of the property, once users will leave the GAD property and enter the Park District, and it gains about 500 feet in elevation as it goes up. There are some areas of respite during the elevation gain that are more level than others, but in general, I think like most Las Trampas trails, it's rather steep. And there is also a really lovely pear tree on the property, which is not part of the native species, but is an old remnant from when this property was actively ranched. Additionally, there's a 30-acre conservation easement on the property that was put in place as part of the requirements for impacts from the development. This 30-acre conservation easement is here. It's also in your board packet. It's in yellow, and it defines the mitigation area that is going to be preserved in perpetuity as part of the conservation easement. Wildlife Heritage Foundation will be holding the conservation easement and will be providing oversight for the management of the easement area. The Park District, as the preserve manager, under the terms of the long-term management plan requirements, will be responsible for the annual monitoring and reporting requirements, as well as grazing and other infrastructure management and maintenance. There are additional mitigation requirements put in place on Ponderosa homes, and they're indicated in the red hashed areas here. And these areas are part of a separate mitigation and monitoring plan, and the Park District will not be taking responsibility of these areas until the permitting agencies deem them successful. So until success, they will continue to be the responsibility of Ponderosa homes. Staff requests an appropriation of funds from Measure AA and Measure WW to cover expenses related to staff time, as well as title and escrow expenses. Additionally, there are safety and security funds related to meeting our requirements for providing water infrastructure for grazing per the long-term management plan, as well as fencing. This area of existing Las Trampas is not currently grazed and will be fenced and incorporated into the larger PODVA grazing unit. The final action today is authorization to accept endowment funds from Ponderosa Homes. These are the wasting and non-wasting funds mentioned before. A total of $232,614 will be transferred to the Park District from Ponderosa Homes. The wasting funds will be spent down entirely in the first 3 years, and then the interest from the long-term endowment will be mature and able to fund the management responsibilities required under the long-term management plan for the conservation easement area. The conservation easement area is only 30 acres of the larger 96-acre parcel. And in 2015, the Board of Directors approved the formation of a community facilities district. This is a special assessment on the 20 new homes in the Red Hawk subdivision of a total of $5,965 per year in perpetuity. These funds will fund the long-term maintenance of the remaining 66 acres on the property, the trails, and related improvements. Today, we are requesting authorization to accept the 96-acre Padva property, a trail easement over the GAD property, and the wasting and non-wasting funds from Ponderosa Homes for the long-term management of the conservation easement area. The next steps for the Southern Las Trampas land use plan include this dedication of the Padva property. We'll be returning to the board in 2019 with the draft land use plan amendment and environmental impact report. And hopefully in 2019, we will proceed with the dedication of the Faria open space parcels, which are a requirement of the Faria Preserve development here in San Ramo. Thank you very much for your time today, President Waspy and members of the board.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Any questions, comments?
President Waspy, before the questions, just a little context, and I know that Director Lane will really remember this. If you see the small green that says Peters Ranch, that was the first dedication. It sat out there as an island for probably 25 years, and everybody said, why did we get that? Why do we have that? The only property in this entire detail that we purchased in the southern end is the Chen property. All of the rest have been dedicated properties to complete. That is Las Trampas Ridge. Maybe Neil, you can show the ridge line. But that really is the entire southern end. It's several miles of the far southern end of Las Trampas Ridge. And so I think this is a very significant, if not devilishly detailed negotiation. I think it also bodes well with the prior comments we heard on McCosker as far as regulatory approval and what's required. You've got different kinds of endowments, different kinds of mitigation, different kinds of easements. NAG had. I really want to compliment the staff on the level of sophistication and detail, but I really think it's educational for everyone to see this little tiny piece of property that has so much detail of staff time and effort and regulatory biological analysis. So I think it's a good example of what we do. But this is a very important, beyond the Padva property, the completion of the southern end of Las Trampas. And I think that's been a 50-year plus effort.
Thank you. Any questions, comments?
Question.
Member Coffey.
I'm wondering if we could find another word, because I am hesitant about approving wasting funds. No?
Wait, it's kind of a financial term of art, not kind of, it is a financial term of art, but one is a permanent endowment that you cannot spend down the principal, which is how we usually refer to it, versus an endowment where you can actually spend the entire amount in like the first 3 years. So it means you can't waste the principal.
We're stuck with the terminology then. Could I
We'll
ask?
work on it.
Could I ask? What is the Wildlife Heritage Foundation? Who is it? And I understand their role here, but I'm unfamiliar with the organization.
Well,
It's NIFLF, right?
Similar. Wildlife Heritage Foundation is a organization that holds many different conservation easements. In fact, they will also be holding the Faria Preserve. They operate similar to a land trust, only land trusts also hold conservation easements as well. But land trusts also hold properties in fee. And my understanding is that Wildlife Heritage Foundation does not hold any properties in fee. They merely hold conservation easements for various other property owners, oftentimes as requirements of mitigation from developers. And they provide oversight. So they'll come in once a year and take photos from specific monitoring locations and send in a separate monitoring report to California Department of Fish and Wildlife, in addition to monitoring reports, more detailed monitoring reports that the Park District will be providing to the same entities.
So it's the developer who seeks out this organization to hold the easement?
Correct.
Yes, because, for example, since we are the fee title owner, we cannot merge the title. At least we can. If we owned it both, they would merge. And that's a requirement of the agency that the easement holder be separate from the fee holder if there's a conservation easement over both. It's something we've been trying to work through because it makes it overly complicated and basically gives us a third-party supervisor in a way of those conservation easement areas. And I've worked with the Wildlife Heritage Foundation for many years. They also, I believe, are doing Wilder. Is that correct? And there's a lot of times when they're going to not have any role with us. They're going to be just the private open space with a conservation easement that they have to manage, and we don't want that. So they mainly do that, but sometimes there's a tangential connection to what we're going to own and a conservation easement. We actually try not to have that happen. It makes our life more complicated, but it's a requirement of the agencies.
Member Corbett.
Thank you for the care and putting together all the pieces for this pretty little piece of property. It looks like it's going to be a great place to take a hike. I was just wondering, this is a little outside of what we're discussing, but I was just wondering how many parking spaces are along that area that's not surrounded by homes? And is there some sort of notice or documentation in the conveyance of those properties that let the neighbors know about the adjacent park and the trail and such things?
Yeah. Yes. Good. That's an excellent question, Director Corbett. There is, as part of the conditions of approval, the town of Danville stipulated that each home in the development is recorded on their deed that public parking and trail access is allowed on those public streets, and that they are public streets, not private streets, accepted by the town of Danville. Because of that, we will be putting kind of a new sign up that will basically say, trail users, public parking allowed on the street. More as a reminder to the local neighborhood walk-in users, if somebody does come and drive in and park there, that it's allowed.
Thank you very much. That's very appreciated.
And it's very much a complication for us because, and I won't even mention Mission Peak, but it frequently gets popular, and then the neighbors complain and say this, and they try to put a gate up. So the great work the staff did from a legal standpoint, from a planning standpoint of getting that as notified is really important. We've learned from our mistakes. We have had instances where neighborhoods have petitioned a council to close off a road, and we did not have that notified properly. But the Las Trampas solution, good or bad, is that, as you recall, the national park, the Eugene O'Neill home, does not have a staging area or public right. And so what we've been trying to do is get these little staging areas along the way, which may be complicated, but we're never going to get a big one based on landslides and what's already developed. So this is our best solution, but I would in no way call it perfect.
Member Lane.
Yeah, well, I'm very familiar with this property and watched the old barn go down and a few other things on the property, and the Padvas owned a whole lot of West Danville at one point. I too want to congratulate staff on a fairly complex piece here with different, I hope, non-moving parts. And I wondered who is managing the GAD?
Yeah, the GAD property is
Yeah.
managed by the larger Wiedemann Branch GAD that was put in place when the Norris Canyon Estates was first approved. And so the Faria parcels as well will be part of that Wiedemann Ranch. And I think that's under a separate administration from the city of San Ramon and town of Danville.
So that would all be county?
Yeah.
Interesting. I wonder if you would put the map up there showing the accesses again, because I want to say a word about accesses.
The larger overview of
Yeah, the overview, and
here are the access points.
yeah. And I do want to say also, I'm very familiar with the Peters Ranch property. In 1978, before Danville was incorporated. A group of us were involved in reviewing that entire development, and we tried to prevent large homes further up the hill, but we were unsuccessful, and so now there are some very nice homes up there with the town of Danville really only being able to determine where the site was specifically. So I thought that was a lot of foresight on the part of the county at that point. And I can't help this, I will point out that when I was very actively opposing the Faria development at the south end of Las Trampas, I was told by several of the planning commissioners that, well, Danville had homes up on the hill, and why shouldn't Saramone? So we're talking about 4 or 5 homes up on the Peters Ranch property, and they approved 780. So I've been looking at this for a little while, but I wanted to indicate how successful we have been in terms of providing access to Las Trampas. And we can use this as an example in trying to get a lot of smaller accesses for Pleasant Ridge, for example. And with this very important Las Trampas land use amendment, you can see we are adding 5, which is pretty good. And right now, one of the other accesses that we have off of street in Danville is Remington Loop. Where's Remington Loop?
It should be up here. Remington Loop is, sorry, I don't have that trail map up, but
Yeah.
it should be off right here.
Anyway, so Remington Loop is very similar in terms of how people access Las Trampas to what we're talking about in Padva. People drive up and they park on a public road, and then they go through a Las Trampas gate and hike up to the top. And for Padva, there are commitments by the town of Danville to make it clear that there is public access up as well. And because we have so many of them, I think these work. And they aren't in the category of Mission Peak, I will say. And there are probably, what did we say, 15 accesses to Las Trampas now, something like that. And a lot of them are out of neighborhoods. So the hikers and equestrians are distributed, which is a really cool thing as far as I'm concerned. And I do want to say that this trail is going to be gorgeous. You know, it goes up a little ways in grassland, but then it gets in to oak woodland, and at least one pear tree is still there.
One pear tree. There's one pear tree. It's
Yeah, they used to.
located-
The pear tree.
They used to have a lot more
It's
pears.
right about here. Is
Yeah.
where the pear tree is located.
Yeah. And there's probably in the
There's only
in
a
the holidays
red-tailed
there's
hawk.
partridges in it. You know?
Yeah.
So I'm really pleased that we have this to us today, and I had you answered my GAD question. You know, I heard what you said about non-wasting and wasting funds, but I don't remember us using that term in the past.
I've seen it
So,
before
oh, you
somewhere.
have seen it.
I have
So
seen
it's,
We've used it.
We've used it.
Particularly when we're dealing with the agencies. That's not only the financial language, but it's also what the agencies require as part of the easement
been a while, though.
requirements.
that's,
And I'm
We
sure.
we haven't used it because we actually agree, we don't actually like it.
Yeah.
I'm sure Ellen has
But
seen
it
it
is
before.
technically what it's called.
have you seen it before?
Yeah.
I mean, it just
But it's
popped
different.
right out at me. So I think that's all I have in terms of questions. Thank you for mentioning the pear tree. Because one of my neighbors lives up there, and he's going on this property all the time, and he picks pears. So that's how I knew it. He has to give some to me. Now, I'm going to tell him.
They're good
that.
pears.
think I had my other questions answered. Thank you. I had a little series of them here, which I really didn't expect that I would have. This is going to be a very popular access to Las Trampas, and as you can see from the overall map, we are beginning to end a lot of our work on Las Trampas. In the south end, you know, there's not going to be a whole lot of other things, certainly not as major as these, and so Dee and I are talking about access to Las Trampas from Valley Hill, which I think is a really important project to move to soon because of the population in the northwest of Las Trampas has no way to get into Las Trampas. So I'd like to see that as a next step for this fabulous park. And with that, I am ready to do a motion if there's nobody in the public.
Any other further comments, questions? Excellent. Member Lane, would you like to make a proposal?
Okay, I would move we accept the dedication of fee interest, transfer and appropriate funds, execute a funding agreement, accept and appropriate funding from Ponderosa Homes, and create a new endowment fund, Las Trampas Wilderness Regional Preserve.
Do we have it? Okay, we have a motion by Member Lane, a second by Member Rosario. Any further comment? Any comments from the audience? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much for
Okay.
your presentation.
Thank you for your work.
Very detailed.
Thank you.
I don't see any Concord rep here.
Okay, as Brian rushes to the dais or the podium there, we will think about an authorization to enter into a memorandum of understanding with the United States Department of the Navy and the United States Department of the Interior, Concord Hills Regional Park.
Good
Welcome,
afternoon.
Brian.
Good afternoon, President Waspy, members of the board. Brian Holt, Chief of Planning and GIS. I think the last presentation demonstrated well, and I think this will also reinforce that being a planner here at the Park District really requires a very broad knowledge beyond just recreation planning. It requires a lot of understanding of the environment, environmental remediation, and any number of different things. So we really, pride ourselves on being able to tackle a number of different issues here. Today I'll be talking about the Concord Hills Regional Park. I put an asterisk on the end of that as that's a temporary working name. So we will be having that conversation at some point in the future on what the final name of this park should be. And what we're requesting today is authorization to enter into a memorandum of understanding with the United States Department of the Navy and the United States Department of the Interior. I'm going to give a little bit of a background on the history of the Concord Naval Weapons Station, starting way back in 1942. And then we'll go into some of the history of the planning that's been done on the property, and then go into the details of this memorandum of understanding, and then sort of wrap up on what next steps are for our future regional park out in this area. So quick thumbnail history here. In 1942, the Concord Naval Weapons Station was originally established. It was originally established as a munitions storage depot, so trains that brought munitions that were constructed somewhere out in the Midwest would come into to Port Chicago, but there was no place to actually offload and store those munitions for any period of time. And this was just included the tidal area, 7,600 acres, and that's the area of the property north of Highway 4 that remains in active military use and known by the Army. It was expanded to include the area that would be the future regional park, 520, 200-acre inland area. And this was in response to the explosion at Port Chicago and really a need to provide for additional storage on site. So there's a direct connection there between the inland area and our future regional park and the explosion at Port Chicago and the Port Chicago Naval Magazine National Memorial, which is located out on the waterfront. In 1999, the inland area of the property was mothballed, and we had worked with the City of Concord and Contra Costa County and George Miller and developing a joint use program for the site at that time, which ultimately was shelved in response to the events of 9/11. And so the base sat essentially in a mothball state until 2005. When it was officially closed and started going through the BRAC process, the Base Reuse Realignment Closure Act. And then at that time, the tidal area, that 7,600 acres located north of Highway 4, was formally transferred to the Army. So this is where we're looking at here. So the tidal portion is, there we go. Tidal portion, this area. That is known today as MOTCO, Military Ocean Terminal Concord, operated by the Army, will remain in operation by the Army for the foreseeable future. The area that is closed is largely located south of Highway 4. This is the North Concord BART station here. Willow Pass Road runs through the site here. Bailey Road runs through the southern portion of the site here, and then Kirker Pass Road. So really the open space between Kirker Pass Road to Highway 4, essentially the greenbelt between the city of Concord and Pittsburgh. This is the area where that is closed that we're talking about. The inland area is outlined in blue. So again, you have the city of Concord. Sorry, my pointer's pointing slow. Not sure what I'm supposed to point that at. So we have the city of Concord. You can see the city of Concord to the west of the property, Pittsburgh to the east of the property. Worth noting that the city limits, the Concord city limits and the Pittsburgh city limits are coterminous. So that area that's open space to the east of the property boundary is actually within the city of Pittsburgh and within their urban limit line. And then you can just see on this aerial just the extent of the roadway, railway network that's on the property there. So a couple terms that we'll be using. EDC is the Economic Development Conveyance. This is the portion of the property on the western side, west of Mount Diablo Creek, which essentially bisects the property, that will be conveyed to the city of Concord. The area on the east side of Mount Diablo Creek, the majority of that area, is PBC, Public Benefit Conveyance, and that's the area that would be coming to us, to the East Bay Regional Park District. A public benefit conveyance is when a federal piece of land closes, it's first offered to another federal agency for a federal-to-federal land transfer. In the absence of any federal agency willing to accept that property, it can then be offered to local agencies through sponsorship of a federal agency through a public benefit conveyance. So for our purposes, this would be sponsored by the National Park Service for park and recreation purposes. And the Department of Interior has identified this area of the property as the highest and best use of the property for parks, recreation, and conservation, and to be conveyed at a no-cost conveyance. The economic development conveyance remains a subject of negotiation between the City of Concord and the Navy. Oops. Make sure I'm on the right slide. Okay. So going into the planning history, as I mentioned, 2005, the inland area closed. 2007 is when the Park District first submitted a letter of interest in the public benefit conveyance for the property. In 2010, the City of Concord adopted a reuse plan for the site, so that's essentially established the project description that the Navy would be evaluating in their environmental analysis under NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act. In 2012, the City of Concord adopted an area plan, so essentially taking that reuse plan and refining it more and making it so it essentially became a part of the city's general plan. In 2014, the National Park Service approved our public benefit conveyance application for 2,540 plus or minus acres. And then in 2015, the Park District initiated our land use plan. And in 2017, the Navy completed a record of decision on the environmental impact statement. The environmental impact statement that the Navy completed was for the transfer and reuse of the property. So they're not just evaluating the transfer of the property to us or to the city, but they're actually looking at the development that's proposed, the regional park, everything else there. And I will just also note, we did initiate the land use plan in 2015. Generally, we don't initiate land use plans on property that we don't own yet. But this was a really unique situation in that there was a lot of environmental planning and negotiation going on behind the scenes with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and others that really necessitated us knowing what our land use was going to be on the property. Otherwise, we would be essentially restricted and encumbered from being able to implement that. So I think that may come clear as we talk about this further. So the reuse project that was adopted, this is the City of Concord's area plan. It was, I got my dates switched up there. The reuse plan was adopted in 2010. Area plan was adopted in 2012. This was the clustered villages plan. This went through an extensive public process, many community meetings, community advisory committee that Director Lane co-chaired. And ultimately, I think they developed 14 different alternatives that looked at land uses throughout the property and essentially landed on what was called the clustered villages proposal to add 12,500 new homes. Largely focused around high density development around the North Concord BART station, and then a series of clustered villages going to the south of the property. 6 million square feet of commercial, 700 acres of city parkland, so pretty substantial city parks possible there. And then also included and recognized the 2,540 acres of regional park / conservation open space. And that's important to note in that depending on who you talk to, this area is either conservation open space or regional park. I think from our perspective, we see that it can be both. But I think that's been part of the nuance in the conversation of this project is it for conservation purposes or park purposes? We've been very strong in that we believe that that it can accomplish both goals, and that's exactly what it's doing, is providing conservation value to the City of Concord while providing public access and recreation opportunities to regional park users. So just a quick overview of the Concord Hills Land Use Plan. We initiated that in 2015. As I mentioned, a core goal of this was to balance resource conservation with public access. We do have about 22.7 miles of new trail. This would be located largely within the Navy footprint, existing rail lines and roads. The Port Chicago Naval Magazine National Memorial Visitor Center, so that partnership with the National Park Service on the Port Chicago history. And then just a series of sites for picnicking, camping, and interpretation. So we've been working on this. We have essentially administrative drafts of the land use plan and the EIR. And really, we're just waiting for completion of some of these next steps to secure the property to finalize that process. So the Memorandum of Understanding. This provides for the property to be able to be transferred to the East Bay Regional Park District. And basically what it says is it obligates the Park District to implement the various conditions of the biologic opinion, the long-term management plan, and the Section 106 Memorandum of Agreement. And basically says that we, the Park District, will comply with all of those conditions that have been established for this property. So we will be managing the property with those conditions in place. So the overarching federal statute here was the National Environmental Policy Act. As I mentioned, the environmental impact statement for that was completed in 2017. But to complete that, there are three major federal laws that restrict and sort of govern the use of the property include the Endangered Species Act, Section 7 of the Endangered Species Act in particular, National Historic Preservation Act, Section 106, and CERCLA, which governs a lot of the environmental cleanup of the property. So going to the, I guess, more straightforward one, but the CERCLA process, this is what dictates the Navy's cleanup, remediation of the property. So for any hazardous material spills or anything along those lines, they do a pretty extensive evaluation of the condition of the property. What they've found is that 2,288 acres of the PBC property, the property coming to us, has been found suitable for transfer. So they issue a FOST, a finding of suitability to transfer. And so that means essentially that the property is clean under the CERCLA provisions. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's pristine. There's still physical materials. There's still they don't necessarily address things like lead paint or asbestos, but a lot of the regulated hazardous materials releases and those types of things have been found to have either been cleaned up or to have not been to exceed a threshold that would be of concern. 243 acres of the PBC will remain under Navy ownership, and they've been found suitable to lease, so a fossil, finding a suitability to lease. So we will enter into a lease with the Navy to manage those properties that they'll continue to own until they can get them to a level that they're clean and to be found suitable for transfer. Our obligation for those areas is just related to vegetation management of the property. So we're not taking on any cleanup responsibility. We're not taking on any of that sort of thing. It just means that we'll continue to manage those properties for the Navy. And you can see the areas in here. My pointer would work. Point to it, but the areas on the east side of the property that are shaded in purple are the various fossil parcels that'll remain under Navy ownership, and so the actual areas that they're looking at are much smaller than what's shown in there. They include a buffer zone, but you can see it would make sense for us to manage those areas as they're really sort of islands within the larger preserve. Director Corbett, I see you have a question. Yes. The dark purple dots are the monitoring wells. So there's a series of monitoring wells throughout the property to evaluate for any groundwater contamination or that sort of thing. National Historic Preservation Act. So this is the national act that requires federal agencies to evaluate the effects of the transfer and reuse of the weapons station on historic properties and archaeologic resources. No historic properties were identified on the property, and given how long it's taken, it's surprising that none of them have become historic. But no listed historic properties are on the property. One archaeologic site was identified within the public benefit conveyance area. This is within an area that is located near one of the more substantial wetland compounds. So it was really pretty straightforward to designate that area as a resource protection area. So this is a site that under the memorandum of agreement, we've basically agreed to manage this area for no public access to protect the cultural resources, and we're also protecting biologic resources in those areas. So we went through the consultation process with the Navy, a number of tribes, the state historic resources officer, and a memorandum of agreement was signed in April of 2017. Endangered Species Act, Section 7. This requires consultation with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service regarding the transfer and reuse. So mitigation for impacts to federally listed threatened and endangered species and associated habitat has to be reviewed. So our three culprits here are California tiger salamander, California red-legged frog, and Alameda whipsnake. And it evaluates impacts to 2,380 acres of the development area. So that's the EDC parcel, the parcel going to the city. So the city was essentially identified their entire development area as an area of impact. And they look to maximize the amount of on-site mitigation credit that they could get through retention of that open space area of the conservation open space or the regional park, the PBC parcel. They will be receiving credit for 2,516 acres of the regional park area. But as I mentioned, we initiated a land use plan that essentially got incorporated into this biologic opinion. So our trails, our picnic sites are really down to detail of picnic benches are included in this biologic opinion as allowable and permitted uses. And that biologic opinion was issued in May 2017. We're currently finalizing the long-term management plan for this site, and the Park District will be responsible for implementation of the long-term management plan. So these three laws, CERCLA, the National Historic Preservation Act, and Section 7, each have different underlying conditions that have to be met in perpetuity, and the Park District is essentially responsible for complying with those once the property is transferred to us, which is the purpose of the Memorandum of Understanding. So going back into more detail on the biologic opinion and the conservation zone, so as I mentioned, our land use plan, 95% of the property is designated as Conservation Zone 1 in the biologic opinion. That's all the yellow area. I know it all looks yellow because it's 95% of the property. 620 acres within that site. You can see them, pointer move a little bit. The dotted areas in here, some south of Bailey Road here, and around the cistern pond, have been designated as resource protection zones. So that means that no public access is permitted in there. And the remainder of the area, public access is permitted but restricted to trail corridors. So no off-trail use is permitted. And you may recall we had a question about dog management in this property at one point, and the determination was made that this should be a site where dogs should be on leash, partly because of this requirement. Director Rosario, yes.
Because of the conservation easement, will we be allowed to graze? I was just thinking about the fire hazard there.
Yeah, great question. Actually, this is very much related to the last conversation on the Padva property. We've been working very hard to ensure that there's not actually a conservation easement on this property, largely because of the size of it and the complexity that the general manager discussed with having a third-party oversight on a property this big. So we've been working really hard, largely led by Assistant District Counsel Christina Kelchner, in trying to negotiate something along the lines of a deed restriction or restrictive covenant for the property that allows us to own the property in fee title but doesn't require that third-party oversight. With regards to grazing is absolutely, it's a requirement of the long-term management plan, not only for fire protection purposes, but for species. So, as I mentioned, the long-term management will be prescribed by the long-term management plan. We're working through those details. Essentially, the long-term management plan is complete, and now we're really working on identifying the level of effort and some of the costs associated with that long-term management plan. And as I mentioned, all of this is essentially as mitigation for development within the EDC parcel. Apology. Conservation Zone 2, this is something that we negotiated to essentially provide an envelope of about 126 acres where we could actually plan up to 35 acres of developed park and recreation facilities. So you sort of see those areas circled in red, and these are the areas that we would have a corporation yard, the visitor center, reuse of some of the magazines on the property, and different picnic areas, camping, and other more active recreational use that wouldn't be permitted in the Conservation Zone 1. So again, we're here. This is sort of the first step in moving forward with the acceptance of this property. So for the Navy to initiate transfer or assignment of the property to the Department of Interior, we need to authorize a memorandum of understanding with the Navy and the U.S. Department of Interior through the National Park Service to facilitate conveyance of the property at Concord Naval Weapons Station. And then just real quickly, next steps. Around the fall or winter of 2018, the Navy will assign the property to the National Park Service. And then around fall, winter 2018, the board will, we will bring forward to the board authorization to accept the property. And then probably in spring 2019, we will complete our land use plan and environmental impact report. I'll just caveat these dates in that, and I imagine the question will come up, is that there are a number of different actions that are beyond our control that are going on that will impact the schedule of this assignment and our authorization to accept the property. But with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions, comments? Member Corbett.
Wow. Does it feel like you've been working on this your whole life?
I have been.
It's really great. It's going to be a wonderful park and acquisition and opportunity for the community to recreate. It's great. And I definitely appreciate the fact that we'll be able to draw attention to the history of the site as well, which I think is extremely important. But I happened to notice a couple things on that last map.
Yes.
The native plant nursery and the community orchard. Are those partially existing, or those things that we're planning for, or?
The native plant nursery is part of our planning. We've included that in there partly because there's a lot of restoration opportunity on this property and a lot of restoration that will be required on the property as part of the biologic opinion. So it made sense to establish a native plant nursery on the site. So we have included that. There is a historic orchard in the southern area of the property that I believe was surrounded a former commandant's house on that site. So, so that orchard exists, neglected, but something that we've included here in the planning. Yes.
Great. You know I approve of that. And the native plant nursery then will be used to grow plants for the site for restoration.
That is the intention at this point. Yes.
That's great. Thank you.
Director Corbett, just one of the things the Navy did do is it took out most of the trees along the creek for security sight distance, because this was aggressively patrolled by the Marines. And the opportunity there is we don't have to do that, but one of the first things I learned a long time ago in Central Park in New York was that Frederick Law Olmsted Jr., the first thing he did was establish a tree nursery because there were no trees. So it took 20, 30, 40, 50 years to build the park, but the trees were growing in the meantime. It's our choice, but we want to designate that site because there are areas there that shouldn't have trees because they're so hot and bare, but particularly along the drainages, everything was taken out by the Navy, anything drainage-wise, that, including cross-cutting the drainages. And one of the things that the wildlife agencies have recommended is to try to reestablish some of the cross streams draining into Diablo Creek. So that's the idea. We'll see how it goes.
Well, thank you very much, Brian. Brian and I have been working on this since 2005, haven't we?
Yes, correct.
You know, he started his family while we were, he managed to do other things. And this, I just am really pleased with this presentation, but the board needs to know that this is the top of the iceberg. Yeah. And there's lots of other things that
need to be done,
that will be discussed on this, but you've just gotten a preview of what we will be doing with land use plan and the EIR in early next year. This is a complicated historical piece of property, and one of the issues is that the city of Pittsburgh line comes right to the edge of this line, and there are discussions to be had that have to do with whether they decide to put large homes on the ridge overlooking the park. And there are discussions continually with the city council. So I want to particularly thank Brian and Christina for the negotiations that they have been patiently pursuing with Concord, and say that I did have the opportunity to go to a city council meeting a couple weeks ago where they were discussing what precisely should go into their specific plan for their property. And it was a public meeting with ideas from everybody, but I think they are moving forward on that. Their concern for us initially was that we would receive this large piece of property, which had to be a park from the National Park Service, and that we would put it in land bank. And I keep hearing that from the council members. And I have to keep reassuring them that we are not leaving it in a land bank, and that indeed we have worked on a land use plan for the last several years, and we are actually way ahead of what Concord is doing in their property. But their property is very complicated as well. I want to point out on this map that you can see they show the creek going through with this little Mount Diablo Creek going all the way through, and this large green large green designation on the other side of the creek is going to be a big park and tournament field for Concord. So we're hoping to have a great connection with them with that park as well as many other things. So Brian did not tell you about railroad people who want to keep the rails and run trains on them.
I did include a picture of railroad lines in the story. That was intentional.
That shouldn't have been a surprise.
And because of the function of this base, there's about how many miles of rails?
I want to say 47 miles of rail.
Yeah, 47 miles of rail. And, there's the prospect of a courtyard there and of a special visitor center. And so I'm sure you're all looking forward to seeing the land use plan as it's proposed, and I hope we are able to stay on schedule and do that in the spring. So it's a very exciting project, and I am really pleased we are at this point, and I really appreciate this presentation.
If I could, Director Lane, just following up on your comments on the rail line, I think it's important to note and the public I don't think always understands this, and this was why it was important for us to start the land use plan and the public outreach when we did, is that a lot of the decisions that have been made on this property are now essentially set in stone. So we may and we will hear different interests from different folks as we come forward with the land use plan about different uses. And one of them that we do hear often about is the rail lines and potential reuse of the rail lines. And perhaps we could have a recreational train on there or something along those lines. Those are great ideas and generally welcomed, but because of the regulatory sort of layers on this property, removal of those rail lines and restoration of those are a requirement of the biologic opinion. So that's not a use that we can really consider. We did get in there something about preserving some sections of rail line for interpretive purposes, but reuse of some of those things. And I think it's also that is why I do try to highlight this 700 acres of city parkland, because there are other uses that have come forward and interests that would not be permitted by the biologic opinion. So we cannot necessarily consider them in the regional park area, but they could very well be suitable uses within the city's area. And so with a pretty substantial amount of city parkland, some of those types of uses can be accommodated in there.
Then I have a question about describing the beneficial conveyance as parks, recreation, and conservation. Is that what is that the nomenclature usually used with beneficial conveyances from the National Park Service?
No.
It isn't.
I would say The public benefit conveyance is explicit, and that's for parks and recreation purposes. Now, different people can have different interpretations of that, and we've had some conversation with National Park Service. And as park people, we see open space and conservation as parks and recreation types of values. Those are the types of parks that we manage, as parks that have natural resources. So we don't see those two things as being incongruent. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, a sister agency to National Park Service under Department of Interior, would look at it as very much as for conservation purposes. The purpose of the area is for conservation of natural resources, and they took some conversations and some gentle nudging to get them to agree that passive recreational use is not in conflict with the conservation values. And I would say on a site like this, in an urban area like this, that a well-managed park system is actually critical to protection and conservation of those natural resources, because otherwise you're just dealing with a series of potentially illicit uses and trespassing. But that's been the nature of the conversation that we've had. Is it a regional park, or is it a conservation area? Is it for the purposes of conserving special status species, habitat and mitigation for the city of Concord, or is it really for parks and recreation purposes? Again, our position has been that it can be both. We can provide a great regional park and protect the resources there and enhance the resources there.
Well, I completely agree with that, but I am wondering if this is a new National Park Service designation for beneficial conveyances.
I wouldn't say that, no.
Okay.
It's just...
Unique.
Specific.
Yeah, National
Okay.
Park Service has been a great partner throughout this process, and they've understood us sort of having to essentially do double duty on this property. And they've been really willing to work with us on that. And like I say, as park people who also, Yosemite is a park, but obviously has very great and important biodiversity and protected species. So we see eye to eye with National Park Service. Those folks who may see through a very specific lens of just mitigation or conservation value or other things, they might, they're a little bit more, get a little bit concerned about sort of adding in those other uses.
Director Lane and the board, I also do want to again acknowledge the effort of Christina Kelcher. I don't think we would gotten as far as we have with Fish and Wildlife Service on the recreation versus recreation without having a very strong lawyer here to help us do that. Christina has been incredibly helpful in working through some rather difficult conversations, of which you don't always get involved with. But the philosophy, you think of two federal agencies being on the same wavelength, it just isn't. It's very interesting that way. The second comment I'd really like to make is to really acknowledge our legislative advocacy. Hard to believe, but we've been through 4 Congress members. It was actually 5 twice. One originally it was George Miller, then it became Ellen Tauschers, then it became Mr. Garaventes, help me, Garamendi, and then it became Mr. DeSaulniers. So we have walked through years and years of going to Washington advocating for this park. This park is bigger than Tilden Park. And what I always like to say, even though it's free, it's never free, because you can see, just like PAVA, the amount of work is sometimes more than if you purchased it outright. In fact, I'd say that always is true, because when you get it for free, there's a lot of other cooks in the kitchen that decide what free is. And finally, just something the full board needs to remember, because we're going to have to continue to advocate this forever, is that we gave Concord $20 million of mitigation credit by accepting the conservation requirements of the Fish and Wildlife Service. And that's a conversation that we've had monthly, yearly, all the time with Concord, who thinks they did us a favor in allowing us to get this park. And I kind of would like to ask, when are they going to, how long is the land bank of the recreation park going to be in the city? Because I'm sure they're not going to develop that park for a very, very long time that the city's going to own. This has been a very long road, and I think the board going to Washington and the advocacy with a great relationship with our Congress members has really helped us. I remember burnt into my skin is a quote from Mr. Miller, who, when I worked with him to establish this park as a boundary and the beneficial conveyance, he says, I will support the park district. Don't be greedy. You also need to help Concord. That was his philosophy. So he was very supportive of the park. When I proposed the boundary, he was very supportive, but he was very concerned that we also need to realize this is a huge burden to the city to make this work for the city side. So he was trying to balance both things, but absolutely supported us all the way.
So this is just one item on this agenda, and we're looking forward to another one later this year, and a larger discussion on the park itself next year.
Yeah, it was necessary for us to bring this item at this point, and that this is the one item that needs to be complete for the Navy to actually initiate that transfer to the National Park Service. The property will be held by the National Park Service for some period of time. We don't necessarily know how long that'll be, but as certain deed restrictions and other things are recorded. So this needed to be in place to ensure that management of the area was going to occur. That said, when the assignment does initiate to the National Park Service, we essentially take over constructive possession. We begin the management of the property. But so the other item would be the authorization to accept the property, which needs to occur prior to National Park Service transferring that property over through a fee conveyance. It's my hope to bring that forward as soon as possible. But as I mentioned, some things beyond our control might influence that schedule.
And specifically beyond our control is the AD Company has filed a lawsuit against the Navy and the city, I believe, which could upset our timeline. We are looking into whether that lawsuit can control the EIS approval on our level of acceptance, which is a big question, and I think that could really be a problem. And I think it's just also the recognition when we do accept this property, the district then has the burden of figuring out how to patrol and maintain these boundaries, because that's one property and the city isn't doing anything on their side of the property adjacent to us. So is it patrolled as one property jointly in a cooperative agreement with the city? Or do we put up a fence now? We're going to eventually have a fence. So there are some complications related to operation and public safety that we're going to have to work with the city on and with our staff. This is, again, freelance, not free, but this is a huge opportunity for the public.
All right, are you ready?
Well, are there any other comments, questions? Member Wieskamp.
I just got to congratulate everybody. I've read in the past about all of these other conveyances and other places that have closed and all the ghastly things that happened. And I do think Concord and the representatives have tried to work together so you both come out whole. How else would we ever get this much land in an urban area that's going to be so useful, even if we can't have the railroad guys out there running their little railroads around? I just think it's going to be so good for the city of Concord as it comes through and develops the plan, which isn't going to be easy, I'm sure, because councils change too. We've already seen that in the perspectives. But what a wonderful opportunity. And I'm going to say I'm going to be optimistic that Pittsburgh will do the right thing.
Excellent. I do have one question. So, Brian, you mentioned that when government agencies give away land, the first in line is a public benefit conveyance, and then economic is second?
No, it doesn't necessarily work quite in that. There's some different mechanisms there. The first step is that when the property is deemed surplus, another federal agency can then take it over. So that's what happened with the title area. So the full base closed. The title area was put up as surplus by the Navy. Navy said, we don't want to operate it anymore. Army came in and said, we do. So the property just transferred to the Army. So it's a federal to federal sort of transfer. The next step is then they say, okay, there's not another federal agency that's interested in this. Are there any local agencies that are interested in it? And that's where there's a series of different conveyance types. There's a public benefit conveyance, a conservation conveyance, economic development conveyance. There's another portion of the property that will actually be going to Contra Costa County, to their sheriff's department, through a public benefit conveyance, and I think they're sponsored by the Department of Justice. And that would be for establishing a training facility. So, so transferring to a local agency for a public benefit, and the public benefit identified on ours is for parks and recreation purposes.
And Dennis, that's really, if you think about Fed to Fed, so that we're really Fed to Fed national parks,
right?
And we're the local host, and to do that. Good example would be Alameda, where actually the Fish and Wildlife Service was supposed to take over Point Alameda, the entire area, and could not reach agreement between the Navy and the Fish and Wildlife Service. So that then was transferred to the VA. All 800 acres of the Alameda Point area went to the VA, who was another federal agency who said, we'll take it. And that's what's happened there. And when Pat and I saw all these things happening, we said, we don't want to lease this. We don't want to be beholden to just somebody else. We want to go in legislatively from day one and advocate for a national park beneficial conveyance for this park. But it could have gone to another federal agency if we did not step in.
I don't know if I'm following correctly. I guess my question would be, why didn't we grab all 5,000 acres and we wouldn't have these other?
Because George Miller at the time would not support that, and Concord was very opposed to that.
Okay. Thank you.
And it is, just to follow up on that, the side of our property is very different than the other side of the property. I mean, the other side that you can see, there's sort of the area that they refer to as Bunker City there, heavily contaminated. Will be held by the Navy. A lot of structures, something that we probably wouldn't want to take on. And there's some other challenges in some of the other parts of the property. Our side of the property is, in old military base terms, relatively clean. And it does have the vast majority of the sensitive species there. So we're really, when you start looking at the species occurrences, our side of the property is clearly the side of the property that should be protected. So, so I think there's some good reasons why we didn't necessarily want to get too involved in the other areas. Local community certainly had advocated for that for some time.
Thank you. So if there are no further questions or comments, I will look to my colleague.
I'd like to authorize that we enter into a memorandum of understanding with the Navy and the Department of the Interior.
I have a motion by Member Lane and a second by Member Coffey. If there are no further comments, members of the public, hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much for your presentations and your efforts. Yes. Our next item is actions taken by other jurisdictions affecting the Park District. General Manager Doyle.
Thank you very much. You have one action today. This is a part of a study in the city of Livermore to coordinate a study of the gap closure for the Iron Horse Trail. This is something that's a little more complicated than other areas of the Iron Horse Trail. And I think we will certainly engage with the planning process and with the city on that level.
It's a good idea, though.
Any comments on that? If there are none, we'll move to, the general manager's comments.
The staff presentation today, again, is Mr. Holt. This is our planning department day. Our recreation planners are basically doing a lot of wildlife planning is what it looks like to me. But some great opportunities there, and I think great leadership from the AGM all the way down through the staff to really modernize and take something that's been working for a long time, but make it much, much better than it used to be. The history of advanced planning now combined into the interagency planning and full department under Brian was to get ahead of development in the East Bay, something very unique to our agency, something that I convinced Pat O'Brien to reorganize the department to do. Watching state parks be encroached upon by cities all over the state, I did not want to see that happen at the Park District. And so Pat was very supportive, and was the board, of really looking at the 33 communities that are in our area and what are they doing, what are their general plans, what are developers doing. And it's been a lot of work, and it's really come a long ways. I want to compliment the department and Brian and his staff for a great lot of work. So, Brian.
Good afternoon. Brian Holt, Chief of Planning, GIS. Thank you very much, and thank you to the General Manager for those comments. I'd like to acknowledge Naoma Laval, Senior Planner here. She's been really a key partner in this for a long time, and we have a number of other planners who have been engaged in this process, and it has really improved greatly over the years. This will be somewhat overlapping with some of the information that was presented during the board workshop, so I apologize if any of it seems redundant, but hopefully we can do a little bit of a deeper dive. But I'll be talking today specifically about the strategic actions by governmental entities, what we call the SAGE process. And essentially what this is within planning, the process where we work with project developers and state, local, and regional agencies to ensure that their land use decisions don't impact district lands or trails, minimize impacts to East Bay resources, cultural and natural resources, and where possible, advance the district's master plan. So I think you saw a real good example of that earlier with the PODVA presentation, where this came in as a development project. We were able to engage early on, try to avoid impacts to our lands, minimize some of the impacts to the other areas by really clustering the development down in some of the lower parts of the property. And then ultimately, you're able to advance the district's master plan of increasing access to Las Trompas. We do this through the monitoring and review of agency agendas, project referrals, newspaper articles, blog posts, you name it, within the 2 counties, 33 cities, and the numerous special districts that we work with. And then we put out a weekly summary of all of these items, the SAGE summary, distributed pretty much throughout the district management and staff, and that's really an opportunity for us to get feedback from a number of folks who maybe have been here longer than we have, who might have all the project history in their head. So it's really valuable for us to get that input from those folks. And ultimately, what this culminates in is what you just heard, the actions by other jurisdictions, as we're kind of monitoring these processes from cradle to grave, and able to report on when a final action has actually taken. I put up just a little excerpt from our vision statement here that I think really relates to this. Provide leadership to guide land use decisions in the East Bay that relate to the district. I think that's, as the general manager mentioned, a really unique function. As I've talked to other agencies, something that not all other agencies do. I would say sometimes some agencies aren't totally appreciative of us doing that to them, but it's a really important function for the district. So we go through, we monitor these various activities, and these could come from whether it's general plan proposals, the urban limit line expansion proposals, some of the big regional planning efforts, Plan Bay Area, a number of those different activities. So the big 30,000-foot sort of planning activities. And then more and more, as the district grows and that line between district parklands and the urban interface basically disappears, we're often looking at single-family homes and really small easements here and there, and commenting on some really detailed items that would otherwise sort of slip by, but would foreclose on an opportunity for us to potentially get some new access access, or where a house might be encroaching on a piece of property, or where there might be some long-standing agreement that nobody really knew about that we can now dive into. Ultimately, this, in a perfect world, leads us into a partnership with our other planning entities, other local land use entities, able to work with the planners there, sit down and talk about our interests, their interests, and trying to identify a good way to move forward, whether that's a modification to their project, or something along those lines, or perhaps there's a way that we can collaborate to accomplish mutual goals. That's always the hope. And then coordinate moving forward, increasingly looking at the fiscal opportunities there. So again, you saw a good example of that on the PADVA project, where initially we were responding to a development activity, and then it moved into looking at the acceptance of a dedication of property, and then the question of, well, how are we going to fund that property? So that moved into establishing a community facilities district and ensuring that that property is funded for the long term. And that's becoming increasingly a part of what we advocate for. So again, this is sort of a weekly review of those government referrals, try to identify coordinating with the executive team and others on what the appropriate response from the district should be. It gives us that opportunity for early coordination. We always try to avoid the late hit. And then put this on here. I mean, we really, we do what I think is a phenomenal job, Naoma and our other planners, in really paying close attention to all these agendas. But we also really rely on getting that input from our stakeholder partners out in the community, who are giving us a heads up on, hey, this project's moving forward. And it's also really helpful when we hear from the board that you all might be hearing about a project that's moving forward in one area or another. Just a quick sort of sample of what that SAGE summary looks like, just identifying what the agency is, where it appears on an agenda, and what the item is, and to the extent we can, how it might impact the district. And these emails go out every week, every Monday afternoon, like I say, to the management staff and to some key staff members. And generally always generate a good amount of follow-up conversation, and that then becomes more substantive projects that ultimately lead to things like we saw today with the PADVA property. And then again culminates with a report back to the board on the actions that this has gone through that process, and the action was taken by another jurisdiction. Increasingly involved in the regional planning conversations, a lot of that related to climate adaptation. So monitoring just the series of different climate programs, sea level rise and other programs that are going on in the region, and trying to identify really what the appropriate level of district engagement is and what the appropriate time for us to engage is. So I've shown this map before. I'm going to flip out though and get a little fancy too. Since Naoma did, I can too. So these are some of our, the current sort of hot projects by others. So over in Richmond, the Quarry project, which we've discussed, adjacent to Miller Knox, is development of about 300 condominium units. Multifamily units on a former quarry site that's in here. Through this process, we actually identified that for them to access their property, they have to cross over a bit of our property. And they ultimately need a construction easement and then a permanent easement for us. So, we didn't have too many objections to the housing project per se. And so we looked at that, but then we did also see an opportunity for improving the access to the East Crest trailhead in Miller Knox on this site. So the developers agreed to work with us to realign the Bay Trail, sort of going through the property here, and then developing what will be a staging area at this location. So, so a good way for us to kind of work that in there. Also, next to Miller Knox, the Terminal 1 property. This is just south of Brickyard Cove Road, which is also on our property. So again, the developer needs certain easements and access rights from us. We were able to engage with them. Well, they'll be rebuilding the Bay Trail through here, doing a waterfront park, some waterfront park improvement plans. And then we ultimately got a condition included in here that at some point we will be working with the developer to try to identify a funding mechanism to provide for implementation or management of Miller Knox. The thinking there being this is 300 units here, 300 units next to the quarry property. You know, these will be daily dog walking spots. Miller Knox will be a daily dog walking spot for these developments. And we don't receive the Quimby Act fees that these projects will generate. Those don't come to the Regional Park District. So looking at how do we establish a funding mechanism that captures the value that essentially our parks provide to these private developments.
And Brian, if I may, I think the board knows that Bill Lindsay has retired as a pretty long-term city manager, and it really is dependent on the leadership of that manager to say cooperate, don't cooperate, because the pressure on them for economic development. So many of these things, like what you saw today with PODVA, was a cooperative community, a relationship with that community and that community's leadership, including the town manager, and a developer who wants to cooperate. But if they're saying, the developer's saying, we're not going to move this project forward if you do what the Park District wants because it has an economic impact that we don't like, you may only get language that says we agree to cooperate in the future, which can mean no or yes. So this is all a negotiated process, and it really depends on the relationship you have, this agency has, with that city manager or city planning director. And so there's a lot more here than just the nice maps. It's also our staff having relationship with that planner, so that planner agrees to call and say, this is up, this is coming to hearing, we're giving you a heads up, or we find out only when the agenda is published. So it's a very labor-intensive process, and it's not a perfect process, but we would never be able to buy these properties. They're too valuable and too communities with pro-development. So it really is what you can negotiate, and the extreme is getting our comments in the record to the point where if we're really important and the board decides this is a critical, then we've got the comments to take a legal argument forward as well, which that without that planning correspondence, we can't take the legal argument forward. So it's just really critical to trying to work out all these.
So how does, I'm back to Miller Knox, because it was clearly pretty intense homes development, and they'll use our regional parks for their recreation. So is there some particular mechanism that we have developed, or does it really depend on the planning department of the city?
It does really
to
depend
put a condition on, for example.
It does really depend on the planning department, and then ultimately the city leadership to support that and support our proposal. And and it's different. I mean, every community has its own personality. They all have their own issues, their own challenges, and certainly Richmond is not unique to that. So these conversations are different in every community, sometimes more difficult, and certainly we respect the city's need to generate some economic activity, but at the same time, we also have to, it's incumbent on us to make the point that it's really the regional park that's providing a really substantive benefit to these private developments, and something that there should be a direct connection there.
And just that the board's role in this is very critical, because I will say with PODVA and Danville, had it not been for Director Lane's relationship with that town, we would not have gotten as far as we could. It opens the door for us to have that conversation that is being paid attention to at the elected level. And that's true with all the projects in your communities, like just all the time. So that's important too. What Whitney's done in Richmond to have that relationship with the council and the mayor and members, citizen members there is critical. This really is a collaborative effort. On Concord was the same way. Without those neighborhood groups, we would not have gotten the support, and Save Mount Diablo, we would not have gotten the support for almost 50% more than 50% coming to us. So it's a long, complicated process, but it's at all levels.
And if I may,
Yeah.
Dennis?
Yes.
Can I ask, speaking of Richmond, it's just triggered the thought, not apropos of this, but the city is engaging in workshops for looking at the future of Point Malati. Are we engaged in that process?
Yes, we have been. We've been asked specifically to participate, and I did participate on a panel of experts, so I'm not sure why I was there, but at any rate, to discuss land use. And there
You're
is
such a good recreational planner. I mean, it's obvious.
You fake it till you make it, right? There's tension there over what the amount of open space that should be preserved versus what level of development and the viability of a development and everything else there. So this is a really good example of where Point Malati, it's on our master plan. We've been very vocal about our interest in having a future regional park out there. We partnered with Coastal Conservancy in Richmond and others to develop the Point San Pablo open space study back in 2012 or something. So there's a long history of the Park District working there, but there's also the litigation and the history that the city of Richmond has and has been dealing with there. So this is really one of those places where, we're at the point right now of deciding, okay, how much should we be involved at this point? And that's essentially what we've said is, the city needs to continue to work through their process with the community to identify what they want to see on the property, and the Park District is willing to partner at the appropriate time. So
that's great. Thank you.
So just building off of just what the general manager was speaking about these financing districts and community facilities districts. I know we've talked about Padva and Faria, which was, I think, the second community facilities district that we established. I think it's important to note when we're having these conversations, we're a pretty good value. I think the annual assessment on the Faria homes, which I'm sure are probably going to be listed for 1.5 million or so and up as they come on. The annual assessment that we have put on there are about $100 a year. So that's pretty good value for access to those trails, access to Las Trampas, just protecting that visual quality there. And certainly the homes are selling for a higher rate than they would otherwise if they weren't accessible. So we don't necessarily feel that we're asking too much. Just real quickly as we're going through here, Indian Valley, we talked about Northern Las Trampas earlier, and the need to provide access through Valley Hill and Lothamer, and then we heard the presentation on Sibley and McCosker earlier. So the two developments in Moraga that we're closely keeping an eye on is the Indian Valley proposal, which is here in this site. You can actually see the site plan there. So a series of, I forget how many homes, located in the flatlands, and then protection of the ridgeline there. So looking at what sort of trail connections or other facilities we might see in that area. And then the Brazzoni property up in this site, which that might be one of the, because of the need for EVMA access for them on Valley Hill Road, some opportunity for us to work with the city and to work with potentially that developer to identify ways that could facilitate access into the northern Las Trampas. So that's an area that we've been looking at for that. Going through here, Brooklyn Basin on the Oakland shoreline, the Oak to Ninth project. Big project under construction. We've engaged with them in terms of the design of their shoreline park, inclusion of the Bay Trail, and working with them to actually close some of the Bay Trail gaps along in that area. Gateway, of course, we're all familiar with. Yes?
On the Brooklyn Basin project, has there been any discussion at all for docks along the water that might potentially be used for rowing folks in the
I think-
future as they
oops, I'm
continue
sorry.
to expand?
I think there's Director Rosario, do you know?
Yeah, that's going to be part of the estuary park renovation, although they're not going to address the actual, that's with the JLAC, Jack London Square Rowing Club. They're advocating that the city rehab those buildings that are there for the boaters, but the initial DD money there was just to rehab the land. But they're looking for other money to rehab the buildings so that the JLAC could use the buildings.
I think that might be a good opportunity for discussion, just based on looking into the future for uses we have in some of our other parks that will be expanding. I can talk to you more about
Yeah.
it.
Director Corbett, at one point, the developer, Signature Properties, actually asked us to take on the city parks. And when we calculated the hardscape management, because it's really intensive, box plants and trees, because it's on piers, we didn't think it penciled out. But they are obligated to do public access improvements in the Bay Trail. There's kind of an interim Bay Trail, then a future Bay Trail. So there is a role for the district, but it's not going to be operating the 3 or 4 parks they will be building. And that, the total development is 3,000 units. That's probably going to be 30 years of development down there.
So another project that we're anticipating coming forward to, this would be the city of Pleasanton this year, would be the Lester property. So sort of a quirk of our ward boundaries. It's over in Pleasanton, but I think it's actually within President Waspie's ward. So well over in that area. This is a proposal to develop 24 or so homes, kind of up on the hills there. We have had a number of preliminary conversations with this developer about establishing a new staging area and access to Pleasanton Ridge in this area, and have, which you can see here, which would be coming off of, what is this? What was that, Dublin Canyon Road, and going into the interior of the property and having a staging area back in this area. We've had a number of negotiations, conversations about relocating, how we move that staging area, expressing some of our concerns. The developer kind of feels like he's, I should note, it's the same developer that's doing the Padva property. So somebody that we've worked with before. Has essentially gotten to the point that they feel that they've done as much as they can to be responsive to us, and so now need to move it forward. So a good example of a project where, we still have some unresolved issues. We're not necessarily sure if, as proposed, we'd be willing to accept the improvements that they're proposing forward, but we essentially had to get to the point that saying, okay, well, let's move this forward through the public process. We'll continue to engage through that process. As much as we try to work these things out before the public process, sometimes we aren't able to, and and we'll see where that goes. And then just 2 others that I'll highlight real quick, just because I know they're anticipating that they'll be coming forward soon, is the Tassajara Parks project, so Contra Costa County. This is a property that we've been involved with for at least 20 years, probably more. This was proposed for many, I think at one point some 4,000 units throughout the Tassajara Valley, and then it went down to I think some 1,500 or so, if you remember the new farm development proposal. That was a proposal to work out, to do some agricultural development with some accessory housing throughout the area on this site. We, the Park District, got very involved and expressed concerns in that and submitted a number of letters to where ultimately the project developer has since come back and is only proposing development on about 30 acres of this northern property and proposing to dedicate the remainder of the property to the Park District. So really has gone a long way from a very big development proposal to to a much smaller, more cluster development proposal, and a pretty big open space component. So we expect that to start going towards hearings later this fall. And then just last one that I'll highlight here is the ranch. So we've talked about this project a number of times recently in the Sand Creek focus area. The developer initiative for this area was adopted by the council, so approval of about 1,100 homes. That provided some level of a buffer from Empire Mine Road, and then a subsequent initiative that provides further protection for the Zika property, and the area south of the ranch was also approved last week by the Antioch City Council. And then we expect the ranch project to move forward later this year. So that's something that I'm sure we'll be hearing about.
Just to comment on scale, so that's over 3 square miles. Some of the last biggest development in the Antioch area, so it's a very big project in both. The developer proposed a restrictive development as a compromise, and then Save Mount Diablo also did the same thing, and both have now been approved by the council, and we're waiting to see where the litigation is going to come from, because this is a big, big impact on the developers.
So that essentially concludes my presentation. I will just say, in terms of sophistication, when I started doing this process, when I first started at the Park District, we would get together on a Monday afternoon, and everybody had their Thomas Brothers map books. And we would go through and mark up the map books and sort of do this sort of thing. We've since gone to the point, largely with the help of Naoma, of actually mapping and tracking these development activities and different easements, and putting these into our GIS system in a way that really helps us in how we analyze these things and communicate them, and really helpful as we go and meet with different cities and different entities, and showing the level of sophistication that we have in monitoring these projects. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions on this, and thank you very much.
Questions, comments?
I'm going to say I think it's one of the most important things you do, because I think if we don't know what everybody is doing out there, and I commend you, because there's so many actions happening in all of these different agencies all the time. But to just be one little foot ahead of some of these things is very, very helpful. And you're looking at some of the things that have changed over time because you paid attention and learned about them early. And so I think that's so helpful for the whole district. It's just really, I can't think of anything more critical, really. So I commend you, and it's nicely laid out.
Thank you.
Well, and I really agree. I'm wondering how much staff time it takes, and what kind of guidelines you provide to staff to have them call a board member and alert them to something that they might want to weigh in on.
Yeah, it's a great question. In terms of staff time, generally, all these agendas come out, 48 hours or so ahead of the, so, it could take a good Friday of kind of going through things or whatever. What I've found, and I think Naoma would concur with, is it's really helpful to do this on an ongoing basis, is because you just build up this sort of bank of knowledge. So if you're coming in and doing this at the first time, it can take a lot of effort, and really challenging to try to figure out, okay, do we care about this, or where do we have an easement, that sort of thing. When you've done it for a number of months, and you start to recognize the items that keep coming forward and those sorts of things, it becomes much easier and quicker, and you're able to sort of really keep tabs on what's going on, and it's really nice because you feel very up to speed on what's going on in other areas. In terms of alerting a board member, I guess I would be happy to receive any guidance or direction on that. My general goal is, if it's something that I think is that you're going to hear about from other people. If it's something that I think that different community members are starting to organize around, or if we're starting to see that there's some level of opposition, or we start hearing the calls for, you know, what's the park district doing about this or that, and if we start getting pulled into something, that's where I feel the need to at least run it up to my AGM or to the general manager to communicate to the board.
I just want to compliment staff on the communication. If they think it's a hot potato, they're usually right through Bob to me or directly to me, and I can make sure that when I'm doing an update with a board member, I have current information for you, because some of these things change one council meeting at a time, and what we thought was going to be a loser becomes a winner, and what we thought was going to be a winner becomes a loser, and that's really hard. I think the staff time issue is, how many of these do we actually have to have staff at planning commission meetings, council meeting level positions? Because you're sitting there on an agenda waiting for all the 15 other items to go. So we really, that's a judgment call, but we frequently will rely on the board member to say, I think this is under control, don't worry about it too much, or, you know, and that's very helpful for having staff to go to the meeting, because that's the time really is the night meetings is a real impact on staff and their families. And so knowing how important, or do you have you talked to a council member and they're good with this, it's important to us because it saves the time. It's very efficient, and you know your areas so well.
And that's where I say it's also having those relationships with the stakeholders in the community, those that we can really trust. And, you know, I know if there's an item going for the Richmond City Council that affects the Bay Trail in any way, I'll get a full summary from Bruce Byer. You know, so I know that we don't necessarily need to be there for each of those items. Similarly with, you know, some of the items that say Mount Diablo might be engaged in, and having those relationships with those advocates and those stakeholders, those trusted relationships where, you know, I can be sure that, you know, we know where each other's at and we're getting accurate information is really helpful.
And the other part I really don't want to discount is the importance of the relationship between planning staff and the field staff. Frequently, the park supervisors or even the rangers in the field are going to be talking to somebody out there and say, hey, did you hear? Do you know about? What are you doing about this? And that can get right back into that process, too. We get a lot of information both on land and on developments from the field staff who are there every day. Well, somebody's putting stakes in the ground at Black Diamond. What's going on? And so that's a little late, but usually it means an engineer is out there surveying for some reason. So staff's really important.
Well, if there are no further comments, thank you very much for your presentation, Brian. I was wondering, has it come on your radar about the by right agricultural event centers, i.e. Vargas Plateau and the barn? The agricultural barn.
I would say that's been a blip on our radar, but that's an
It's a blip. I'm told it's going before the Alameda County Board of Supervisors, and I know we had opposed it, or pardon me, not opposed it. We sent a letter of concern. Are we going to send, along with the city of Fremont, are we going to send a letter or a representative to the coming meeting?
President Waspy, Carol Victor, District Council. The ordinance is a microbrewery ordinance that would allow it as of right, a small microbrewery as of right in an agricultural zone. We had submitted a letter earlier suggesting that that be subject to a conditional use permit. The county took a number of comments and has revised it so that there has to be 20 foot of roadway to have a microbrewery approved on your property. We are sending a comment letter basically ensuring that it's 20 feet of roadway, not including bicycle lanes and shoulders. And also, again, suggesting that it be subject to a conditional use permit. So that letter should go out probably today.
Today, yes.
Okay, great. And will you send me a copy, please?
Yes, the whole board will be copied on that letter.
Excellent, thank you. And then I hate to keep bringing up Ward 3, but Llama Lane is coming up tonight before the Fairview MAC. There is an applicant to purchase it, and, well, we're not taping this, are we? No, the applicant says, of course they'll give us an easement, but if that's what everybody says. But I guess the city of Hayward is not going to allow them to do this based on the fact they don't have enough water capacity to fight fire up there. So members of the community are asking us, appealing to us to help out in that.
President Waspy, I think that's news to us, but also we've been trying to be party to the negotiations on the settlement of the lawsuit, and the fact that other parties have not directly contacted us is pretty strange. I mean, this is a litigation item that we've been trying to settle for 4 years, so interesting.
Yeah, and President Waspy, Carol Victor again, we will look into that. And I'm just wondering, there's some confusion there in terms of Llama Lane. Llama Lane is commonly referred to as Llama Lane, but it's not actually Llama Lane, and I'm wondering if that explains a little bit of what's going on, but we're going to look into it.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Brian. Keep up the good work. Okay, back to GM comments.
So thank you very much. A great planning day for the Park District. I also want to just comment that's not written up here, and it piqued my attention because I believe Director Lane asked how much has our fire activity been, so we provided some information. 100 water drops on 13 incidents of separate fires, and also 24 fires we've responded to. That is a lot. I just have to say, and we're not even into the fall dabble wind season. So I think the fire department's getting a tiny bit of rest right now. We haven't had major fires here, but they're going to be on alert as we go through the fall season, because it's another threat. That's it for the GM.
Any questions or comments on that? Member Lane.
I saw that we had an article in the Times that you put in here about us taking preventative steps. But, I was wondering if we were going to do something that would reflect how much of our activity has been on these fire incidents.
Yes,
wasn't that in the works? And I just don't think I've seen it yet.
We're working with Public Affairs on seeing if we can get some press interest in all our responses on that. But what that article really was about our efforts on fuels management and prevention.
Yeah. Well, I thought that would be the 100 water drops and 24 fire incidents article, because I think that there's a great deal of interest on the part of the public. So I'm looking forward to seeing us do something that where people will understand what's happening locally. And I think the water drops is a really good thing to talk about, because everybody, I was just talking to some fire people, but they said, are civilians watching water get picked up? And they said, it was just really great. And then they picked it up, and they picked it up, and they picked it up, and it got a little old. Yeah. But for most people, they don't see it. They don't see them, the Bambi bucket at work that much. And I just think we ought to talk about what we are doing actively, because I don't think people have any idea how many small fires have successfully been put out since June or so. And I would think the papers would be very interested in that. Oh, go get them.
Director Lane, Carol Johnson with Public Affairs. Very timely conversation here, because we do have an interview planned this Thursday with a brand new beat reporter for East Bay Times, who we hope will be interested in this particular specific topic.
Great, and my comment would be, and I preface this by saying I'm probably the largest cheerleader for the fire department, except my colleague right next to me. Of the 28 fires, how many of them are district fires?
Inside
the,
A very, very tiny, I can't give you exact number yet, and I will get that, but a very, very small amount. I think the Martinez fire, even the one at Sonoma, I don't think it got onto our property. I think almost all of them have been other people's property, not ours. But I know the Martinez Ridge fire on Highway 4 included property we own.
So I think this speaks to, well, it speaks to our fire prevention efforts, and it also speaks to the professionalism of our fire department. In the old days, we used to beg to go to fires and have CAL FIRE trust us to be professionals. And now by some of these documents we see, we're covering stations for CAL FIRE every day since July 27th. We're going to fires, we're going out of county. So I think it's a testament to the great work of the fire department, and I would compliment them. And also, hopefully, you'll answer affirmatively this question. The state does reimburse us, right?
On a state-requested assistance, they reimburse us. But the local fires that, let's say, Consolidated Fire or Alameda or a city, and it's near our park, we're responding on our own. I believe that's correct.
Sure, yeah, that's the mutual aid concept. That's been forever. All right, thank you very much. Any further questions on the GM's comments? Then I think we move to announcements from the closed session. Council.
There's one announcement from the closed session. By a vote of 7-0, the board denied the claim of the City of Oakland.
All right, thank you. Okay, we will. Okay, we have board committee reports. We have a committee report of the executive committee on August 2nd. Any questions, comments on that? Hearing none. The operations committee on July 19th. Hearing no questions or comments on that. The operations committee meeting of June 21st. And the Natural and Cultural Resources Committee meeting of June 20th. Hearing no comments on any of those committee meetings, we will now move to public comments. Looks like we've driven all members of the public out. Chris, you got anything? Great. We'll move to board comments, and first off today will be Director Corbett.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. So, starting on August 16th, I attended the swearing-in of District Attorney Nancy O'Malley. It was a very nice family affair. She turned her annual barbecue into the swearing-in ceremony. It was a great place to talk to lots of different community members, including the fire chief of Alameda County, where we had an opportunity to discuss wildland fires and the work that we all do. On the 17th, I had a meeting with Chris Newey and the other folks from AFSCME to catch up on things. On the 22nd, I attended the Finance Committee meeting. On the 24th, I attended a meeting of the Master Gardeners, but why I'm mentioning this today is that there was a lot of conversation with regard to the Garin Apple Festival and work that some of the Master Gardeners who in their unofficial capacities are working there at Garin, and they were encouraging others to help out there within the Master Gardeners group. So I thought that was very positive. On the 27th, I attended the I guess it was a ribbon cutting for the Oakland's Fairyland entrance that was helped paid for by our Park District funds, and I know Director Rosario will say even more about that. It was a very nice event. And then September 1st, Saturday, I attended the Crab Cove Fish Extravaganza, which included everything from a fish bicycle parade to casting and teaching people how to fish, and the ribbon cutting for the new fish-shaped bicycle rack. But I just want to say one comment. September 1st was a really important day nationally. A lot of people's minds were on other issues with the funeral of John McCain, and it was just so nice to be out in the community where people were talking about how they could make the world a better place. So it was a nice place to spend that day. All right, that's it.
Thank you. Member Coffey.
Thank you, Mr. President. I accompanied the Mayor of Antioch on a tour of the Hazel Atlas mine with a group of delegates from Antioch's sister city of Chibu, Japan. And that was an interesting experience. I drove by the Albany Beach construction project, and there's an impressive amount of activity going on down there, as we discussed a little earlier. I attended on August 16 an event honoring the mayor of Martinez, Rob Schroeder, and that evening, Mila and I attended the John Muir Land Trust annual stargazing party at Fernandez Ranch, which is always fun. On August 18, I wanted to tell you about this piece of land out in Port Costa that we hadn't hiked through in the past. And I think we adopted a new lease on the property last year. The Port Costa Conservation Society's 83 acres up in the hills above and a little east of Port Costa, with some incredible views of the Carquinez Straits. I want to highly recommend it. And an interesting history around that land as well. I attended the Finance Committee on August 22nd. On August 26th, Mila and I went on a hike led by the Sierra Club, featuring the Sand Creek Initiative area. And specifically, we hiked from Contra Loma up into Black Diamond, where there were some really wonderful views of the Sand Creek Basin. And at that point, we were able to envision where the development was going and where it wasn't. It was a very useful morning hike out there. On August 31, we attended a Contra Loma evening walk led by naturalist Virginia Delgado. And it was interesting because a city councilwoman, Monica Wilson, and a former mayor, Jim Davis, just showed up for the hike. And it was kind of fun that some local notable folks just show up for our naturalist-led hikes. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Rosario.
Okay. Let's see. On 8/16, I had an opportunity to reconnect with an older constituent, and Helena Foster. For her 80th birthday, we planted 8 redwoods at the old mill site. And I got contacted by her aides that saying she was starting to get onset of Alzheimer's. And so they thought it would be great if she could see her trees one last time. And so I just wanted to thank the Redwood crew, Remy Rodriguez, and then Elaine Deshays, and we arranged to get her up there and see her trees that had grown substantially since we planted them. And she was very grateful. And so that was very, very touching event for her and her aides and me too.
I sure say that's going to have been good for you.
Yeah, yeah. And then 8/22, I attended the Finance Committee meeting, and then on 8/25, I attended Larry Reed's Oakland District 7 breakfast, and we met at the Oracle Arena, and we met with the president from the Oakland A's. And this was like a public hearing, and there was a lot of people there, and I think they heard a lot that people wanted them to stay at the Coliseum. And I was able to put in my 2 cents for a professional women's basketball team there. Also, I reminded them that if they do stay at the Coliseum, that they think about connecting our Bay Trail with the Coliseum somehow. And they were very interested. In fact, he pulled me aside and said, we really want to do that, so keep it. So they asked us to attend the next public hearings here and meetings if we could. But they're definitely, David Cavall, the president for the A's, was very, very interested. And then the ribbon cutting ceremony, Oakland Children's Fairyland was great. Haven't been in there since I was a child, and God, those things shrunk.
Yeah. I noticed that.
So big when you were a child.
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
And believe me, I was tiny. So, but it was great to see all the work there at the park at the entrance there to Fairyland, and the renovations they've been doing on the inside. It's wonderful. There's an adult day or evening at the end of September. That's the only time adults will go in there without a child. So I highly recommend it. And then on 8/29, I attended a meeting with Steve Brazzoni and Jerry Kent. We looked at the trail on School Street, And apparently, the city of Moraga is trying to get him to do those repairs there. And if someone could let me know if that is, in fact, our trail, it sounds like we should be doing the repairs and not Steve Brazzoni. But I took an instant liking to this guy. He's quite a character. He's the oldest son of the Brazzoni family. And he says, I have nothing to do with Indian Valley. Don't talk to me about it. My mom and the lawyer side of the family is doing all that. He says, I want nothing to do with that. So, but if someone can get back to me on that, that'd be great. And then over the holidays, I did the 2 walks with the Bay Area Ridge Trail and ride hike there. Hiked Redwood, and then Anthony Chabot the next day. So a total of about 22 miles in 2 days. I'm amazed at, there was one guy there who was 80 years old, and I hung out with him. And I was still tired. I couldn't believe it, but a great event. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dee. Whitney?
Yeah. It sounds like I've letting things get loose in Richmond. So I'm going to be working my way back into the information pool to try and make sure I need to find out exactly what's going on from the Park District standpoint, but also from the people that come to the land use planning activity in Richmond tomorrow. Not tomorrow, but 11. So I just wanted to make that point that I've got some catching up to do. A lot of it will stimulate some of the old relationships, not old, but current relationship with Bruce Baird. I haven't seen him in about a month. Was wondering what was happening with Point Melodic. So I see now. My view of Point Melodic is probably
Turn on your mic.
my view of Point Melodic goes way back as a kid, and I've got some definite opinions on what could be a very beautiful development without much traffic from cars and just hold down on some of the development that doesn't need to happen. And what we're doing in Richmond is allowing outsiders to come and plan and take the views and the openness of the little lagoon that makes up the point. Okay, and that's all I have to say. I'll be getting with a couple of people on the board here and others to make sure that this, whatever happens, is right. And yeah, that's all I have.
All right, thank you. Member Wieskamp?
You're going to be busy.
Yeah. No.
Good for you. I went to the Chamber of Commerce presentation, very interesting in Livermore. It was about agribusiness. We have things growing there, everything, wine obviously, olives, pistachios, and offshoot businesses, making specialty wine labels it's just fascinating, all these things that tie together, and it financially works for the whole industry. I met with Eric and Lisa and Livermore to discuss my priorities in Ward 5. And I'll just share a couple of them. Tesla is one of my most important. I think it should be for the whole area. Niles Canyon Trail, people love it. We got to get it done. And I think we should do our level best to get trails going into Doolin Canyon so people can see that wonderful area. You have the population both in Dublin and Livermore that would just love it. And it would be a new, exciting place to walk that's amazingly quiet. Day in the park, everybody celebrated. The temperature was 82 degrees, I believe, which was a new phenomena. I think we have a great partnership with Taylor Foundation. Staff was there, police, everyone had a good time. The Fremont Liaison meeting, we had an early tour with Catherine and with Ira, both of them competing as naturalists to tell us all about Ardenwood, but it was fun to have it. And the tour was pretty quiet. After that, we had a meeting that was just mainly updates, including the Dumbarton Quarry Campground and the Bay, which we're all going to go see, I assume, on Friday. And we closed in honor of Joe Perry. I think he was so much a part of that park for so long, and I've never seen a man enjoy selling pumpkins better than Mr. Perry. I hope that our staff can work with, and I think our naturalist is, the people who have been putting on the poster contest at Coyote Hills for years. They're a little tired. Audubon's willing to help. One year they actually had 600 entries. Teachers ask about it. It's art, and they also have to do a written comment about why they choose the animal. And so it's just a good learning experience for them. So hopefully we'll be able to do that. On Labor Day, I went to Beverly and I take turns checking out Castle Ridge to see if there's parking. And so I went on Labor Day, got there about 9:45. It was pretty full, but there were still at least, out of 50 spots, I would say 12. And the early people were leaving and new ones were coming. And every other person had a dog. 2 women came down with this huge German Shepherd and say, we come here every day, and they really love it. So what a great addition. It seems to be working out well. One complaint, we need to add a waste can to the front. And the lady said it's very obvious because people, where you come down from the trailhead, had dropped some leavings from a dog or two in a cute little bag there. So maybe we could talk about adding that for, then it's better for anybody who has to work in the park too, isn't it? I would think that would be good. And I'm looking forward to the tour on Friday, and I hope everybody will be there.
Thank you. Member Lane.
Thank you. I have, in the last couple of weeks, I had a chance to go to the Tri-Valley Mayors Summit. They had a lunch, and the mayors or vice mayors talked about their communities, primarily focusing on the economics of their community, and evidently all 5 are just doing fabulously. Just ask them. But very nice opportunity to see a lot of different people. Then, as I mentioned, I went to the Concord City Council, where they were talking about their specific plan for their part of the Naval Weapons Station. I went to the Contra Costa County Elected Women's lunch at the old spaghetti factory in Concord. And of course, it's political season, but there were 45 people who came to that lunch. And the introductions and the campaigning took a little time, but it was very nice to see everybody. And then while I have never hiked yet on the hike and ride, I try to go with the trail staff and help with the dinner that they do, which of course they couldn't do over open barbecue, so they did it at Tilden Shop area and brought it over. And it's always interesting to talk to the people who are on that ride. You know, they were just had their first day, and these beautiful horses and everybody chit-chatting. So I really like doing that. And they always do it at S. Anderson in Tilden at that equestrian picnic area. Then Carol and I went to the Real Estate Marketing Association for Saramone Valley about a week ago and brought the video for the economic study. And, you know, that's just such a cool video. It pretty much says what you want to say about the Park District. And I added just a few things, and particularly just went ahead and talked some about Burrell because that's what everybody asked me. And some other things like electric bikes on the Iron Horse Trail. Then I did go to Camp Arroyo. I saw Ann a little bit, but you know, one of the things that interpretive staff did this year was bring the new mobile visitor center
And play games.
And there were some kids at the at Camp Arroyo and other adults, and they came and talked to a couple of naturalists, which I thought was a nice feature, as well as having our police there looking to keep those rowdies all in line. Then been working at the museum. You know, this is California Indian time at the museum, and so I'm hoping to get people who are teaching fourth graders there to the Ohlone Gathering, which is always that first Sunday in October. So if you haven't been there recently, I'd suggest that that's a good thing to do. And then Jim O'Connor showed me the new Native Peoples map. So these maps are coming out, and we're figuring out how we're going to distribute them, right? Jim and Carol are going to settle on something. But I have a couple of them with me if anybody wants to see them. And then I think on the 22nd, there's going to be a dedication of the Radke Martinez sign. Is that correct? Yes. So do you have some information on that? I just have wellness walk. Our calendar doesn't say anything about it. So is there a time that's scheduled?
The dedication of the actual unveiling of the signage at Radke Martinez will happen at the conclusion of the multicultural walk, which should be around 11:30 noon. So we will provide more information specifically, and it will conclude with some refreshments as well. The sons of the Radkes will be in attendance.
Okay, so they know about it and everything, yeah. Okay, and then, you know, I talked about Valley Hills access for La Miranda, and as it happens, Valley Hills is the northern boundary of my ward. So it's Dee's constituents and my line. And so I am going to ask the question about, are you putting some money in the budget for that? Access, planning, whatever it needs, because it is time to pay attention to that. And that's it.
Thank you very much. Well, on August 29th, I attended a Only in the Park District event. The people I hike with or see every day, who are strangers but friends, decided to have a walkers picnic, a Lake Chabot walkers picnic, which it was great. And they don't call themselves hikers, they're walkers. And so I got together with 60 or 70 people that I see every day and greet, and got to know them a lot better. And we had a wonderful picnic there. And they tell me this is an annual event. This is the first time I've went, but it was really great. They all had great things to say about the park, and in Lake Chabot in particular, because they all come there all the time and are big, big supporters. On the 30th, I went to the Fremont Liaison Committee meeting, and Director Wieskamp described it. I am kind of wondering, we are going on a field trip there Friday. That great clip that DQA, what was his name, that showed up late? Yeah, Bob. He said he had the flash drive, video clip. Are those available? Because that's such a fascinating thing to watch that drone, watch all the construction. Is that available to people like us?
I'll try and work with Public Affairs. Maybe we could put it on the website. He has a shortened version.
That'd be great. I think especially Mayor May would love to see something like that on Friday. On August 31st, I met with John Sullivan, who's a gentleman who lives off the Ten Hills Trail in Lake Chabot and who has advocated for a number of things with fire safety. We met with him in a public meeting on the trail. He seemed to have some more questions, so I did come over to his house and met with he and a former city manager of San Leandro. They still have some concerns. I think they're understanding what we're doing and what's great. The best part of the whole thing was the fact that I met him on whatever August 31st was, but I think it was on like August 28th that we had a 52-acre fire in Castrovalley in the hills behind Castrovalley, close to Dublin, and did turn out that it was Eagle that was the first unit on the scene and was dropping water. And as I told John, not too cavalierly, yeah, you're right, John, we had a fire and we put it out, like we always do. Yes. Yesterday, excuse me, I had the opportunity to go run around the parks. I went to Guerin. They were interesting. Not too many folks at Guerin on Labor Day. It's well, Guerin's a picnic area, and it was pointed out, and also in Lake Chabot, that no burn policy is a great PR deal, but I'm interested in knowing. There weren't many people in the parks that I go to.
There was hardly anybody.
Yeah, if you can't go on Labor Day and barbecue, and I understand it completely, and I think it's a good public relations deal, but the attendance was down. But they were having getting ready for the Apple Festival. I went to the Ardenwood Rail Fair, just millions of people, and everybody having lots of fun. And I guess that's it. I look forward to the field trip. Did Chief Chioburo leave? I wanted to thank him for his courage and possible valor at the start of this meeting. That's an inside joke.
I had someone to adjourn in honor of.
Oh, okay, excellent. So if there's no further comments from anyone, public, staff, anybody?
No public.
Member Lane.
Okay, I'd like to ask that we adjourn the meeting today in honor of Randy Parent, who is a long-term helicopter pilot for the Park District. He worked for the district from 1974 to 2003, and he was a friend of mine, and along with Tracy. And there are lots of Randy stories about him wooing Tracy at Black Diamond from the helicopter. And he was a very proud Vietnam vet. He drove me around on several July 4th parades. And I never had to say anything because he would drive here and there and he'd say all these great things about the Park District and about the current Jeep. And here's the director, and I would wave. And so, it was always an event to go to anything with Randy. He fought cancer for a long time, and it took him in this last month. And so I am pleased that we can adjourn in his honor.
I agree. With that, we are adjourned.